Hey there, tonight we're exploring the intricate dance of survival and strategy in the bustling Aztec marketplace. What you're about to discover is how these traders navigated not just commerce, but a world where cocoa beans were currency, and every transaction was a step on the tightrope of empire. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. Step into the heart of the Aztec Empire, where the air buzzes with the energy of Tlaxcala, the marketplace that makes your local flea market look like a lemonade stand. Picture this, a sprawling commercial hub, the size of a dozen football fields, jam-packed with every conceivable item under the sun. On any given day, this place is teeming with upwards of 60,000 people that's like the entire population of a small city crammed shoulder to shoulder, haggling over everything from jaguar skins to jade figurines. Now, you're probably picturing a charming little barter system where folks trade chickens for corn and everyone leaves with a smile. Sorry to burst that quaint bubble, but the Aztecs had this trading thing down to a science, and it was anything but simplistic. Forget trading your neighbor a goat for some beans. The real currency of the market came in the form of cacao beans and cotton cloaks. Cacao beans were the pennies of the time, and cotton cloaks were like your high-value bills. Need a quick caffeine fix? That'll be about 10 cacao beans for a cup of hot chocolate. Navigating Tlaxcala was no small feat. You'd probably need a map, a compass, and maybe a few years of experience to not get completely lost. The marketplace was meticulously organized into sections dedicated to specific goods, and the sheer diversity would make your head spin. You've got your food corner, loaded with everything from maize to avocados, your luxury goods aisle, packed with feathered capes and gold jewelry, and let's not forget the live animal section, because who doesn't need a live turkey or two? Trading in this buzzing metropolis wasn't just about the goods. It was a social event, an economic engine, and a political statement all rolled into one. This wasn't just commerce. It was a demonstration of power and sophistication. The Aztecs had created a system that allowed them to efficiently manage and tax this giant beast of a marketplace. They had officials patrolling the market to keep order and ensure no one was pulling a fast one. And if you thought you could sneak in a little price gouging, think again. Those officials were all over it like ants on honey. So, why does this matter? Well, Tlaxcala wasn't just a market. It was the beating heart of the Aztec economy. It was the place where different cultures met, mingled, and yes, sometimes clashed. Goods from as far as the Maya regions and the Gulf Coast were bought and sold, making it a vibrant melting pot of ideas and influences. It was here that the Aztecs demonstrated their prowess in trade, diplomacy, and even espionage. And while we're debunking myths, let's talk about the romanticized notion of a peaceful, idyllic trading scene. The reality was a bit more cutthroat. Competition was fierce, and traders had to be shrewd, savvy, and sometimes downright ruthless to survive. They were the original hustlers, always on the lookout for the next big thing, always ready to strike a deal, and always wary of getting shortchanged. In the midst of this organized chaos, the Aztecs were laying the groundwork for a complex economy that would astonish the Spanish when they arrived. They had created a system of credit, loans, and even proto-banking practices that allowed them to facilitate massive transactions and keep the wheels of commerce turning smoothly. So next time you're in line at the grocery store, grumbling about the long wait, just remember, at least you're not trying to buy a turkey with a handful of cacao beans while dodging a live jaguar on sale next door. The Aztecs were doing it long before Amazon, and they did it with style, flair, and a touch of ruthless efficiency. Welcome to Tlaxcala, where the stakes are high, the stakes are higher, and every day is a trading adventure. Now, let's zoom in on a figure who straddled the line between celebrity and secret agent in this bustling marketplace, the parchdecker. These were the Aztec traders who could be seen as the original globetrotters, except instead of Instagramming their brunch, they were busy navigating treacherous terrain to bring home the goods. The parchdecker were a unique blend of merchant, diplomat, and yes, even spy. That's right, They were the James Barnes of the Aztec world, minus the tuxedos and martinis, of course. Let's get one thing straight. Becoming a parchdecker wasn't a career you stumbled into because your uncle knew a guy who knew a guy. This was a calling that required rigorous training and education. Picture a boot camp where you learn to negotiate like a Wall Street trader, but also pick up a few espionage skills along the way. The parchdecker were trained to handle not just the art of the deal, but also the delicate dance of diplomacy. After all, when your job involves traveling up to 100 miles to barter for exotic goods like Quetzal feathers and cacao, a little charm goes a long way. You might think that such a life would be dripping in glamour and endless adventure, right? Well, here's where reality kicks that notion to the curb. Sure, traveling to distant lands sounds exciting, but in reality, these journeys were grueling. Imagine trekking through dense jungles, dodging wild animals, and dealing with the constant threat of bandits. And if that wasn't enough, the traders had to carry their wares themselves or rely on trusty porters. Forget the image of leisurely camel rides through serene deserts. This was more of an endurance marathon with a hefty payload. Now, let's not overlook the political clout these middle-class merchants managed to wield. Despite not being at the top of the social hierarchy, the parchdecker had the ear of the elite and the respect of the rulers. They were the crucial link between the empire and the far-flung regions it traded with. The goods they brought back were not just commodities, but symbols of political alliances and economic might. In many ways, the parchdecker were the lifeline that sustained the empire's wealth and influence, making them indispensable despite their modest social standing. And here's an interesting twist. They weren't just in it for the money. Sure, wealth was a perk, but what really set the parchdecker apart was their role as information gatherers. They were the eyes and ears of the empire, picking up valuable intel as they traveled. This wasn't just a side gig. It was a vital service to the Aztec rulers who needed to know about potential threats or opportunities in distant lands. The parchdecker were like walking news networks, long before CNN or BBC ever existed, still clinging to that romantic notion of the trader as a freewheeling adventurer. Let's bust that myth wide open. The parchdecker lived under a strict code, bound by laws that governed their trade and conduct. They were not free agents, but rather members of a highly organized guild, complete with its own hierarchy and rules. This wasn't about personal glory, but about serving the state and their fellow traders. Sure, they had access to luxury goods and occasional spoils of travel, but the reality was a disciplined and demanding life that required cunning, resilience, and a fair bit of courage. In essence, the parchdecker were the unsung heroes of the Aztec economy. They were the ones who ensured that the wheels of commerce kept spinning despite the challenges they faced. So, the next time you're scrolling through your online shopping cart, spare a thought for these intrepid traders. They were navigating treacherous paths and brokering deals long before the concept of 2-day shipping was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. The parchdecker might not have had an easy life, but they sure knew how to make an impact, both in the marketplace and beyond. And while we've only scratched the surface of their world, there's much more to explore about these fascinating figures. So, let's keep this trading adventure alive and continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of the Aztec marketplace and the remarkable lives of those who dared to navigate it. Speaking of navigating the intricacies of the Aztec marketplace, let's dive into the economic ecosystem that made it all tick. Picture an ancient version of Wall Street, minus the suits and skyscrapers, but with plenty of hustle and bustle. The Aztecs weren't just about flashy feathers and dazzling gold. They understood supply and demand long before it became an economics 101 catchphrase. Take obsidian blades, for instance. These were the Swiss Army knives of the Aztec world, sharp, versatile, and essential for everything from ritual ceremonies to basic daily tasks. The demand was sky-high, and if you think obsidian was just lying around waiting to be picked up like seashells on a beach, think again. These stones were quarried from volcanic regions and transported over long distances, often by foot. Imagine the logistics nightmare. Despite the challenges, obsidian was so valued that it was sometimes worth more than gold. That's right, in a twist that would make any modern economist scratch their head. These sharp rocks were a cornerstone of the Aztec economy, traded far and wide, with prices fluctuating based on availability and distance from the source. And then there were the Quetzal feathers. luxury goods that would make today's designer handbags look like grocery store tote bags. These vibrant plumes were so coveted that they were used to make elaborate headdresses for the elite. They were sourced from the dense jungles far to the south, and the effort to procure them was no less than a high-stakes expedition. Traders risked life and limb for these feathers, battling everything from wild animals to tropical diseases. It's like the ancient version of a Black Friday sale, but with actual mortal peril involved. Now, before you get swept away by the romance of it all, let's have a reality check. The marketplace wasn't just about luxury and exotic goods. It was a living, breathing organism where every player had to find their niche or get crushed by the competition. Supply and demand dictated the flow of goods, and prices weren't fixed. They were more like a volatile stock market. Traders had to be sharp, not just in bartering, but in reading trends and anticipating needs. The stakes were high, and a bad trade could mean the difference between feasting and famine. But let's not forget the unsung heroines of this bustling bazaar, the women. Often overshadowed by the more glamorous parchdecker, women were the backbone of the market economy. They were the ones behind those stalls, selling everything from staples like maize and beans to handmade textiles and pottery. Women weren't just sellers, they were producers, crafting goods that filled the market's aisles. In a society where gender roles were pretty rigid, their contribution was vital, even if it wasn't always acknowledged. Women navigated a complex web of societal norms and expectations. While they might not have been the ones journeying to far-off lands, they were every bit as savvy and strategic. They managed their own networks, haggling over prices, ensuring quality, and building relationships with suppliers and customers. In a way, they were the quiet powerhouses, maintaining the market's steady pulse. It's like being a CEO and a public relations manager rolled into one, all while balancing domestic responsibilities. And here's where we debunk another myth. The idea that women in the Aztec world were merely passive participants. The truth is, they wielded significant economic influence. Some women ran their own successful enterprises, accumulating wealth and status. They were proof that, even in a male-dominated society, women could carve out their own paths and thrive. So next time you think of the Aztec marketplace, remember it wasn't just the domain of the adventurous parchdecker or the elite nobles. It was a place where women, through their ingenuity and resilience, played a crucial role in keeping the wheels of commerce spinning. In this vibrant ecosystem, the marketplace was more than just a place to buy and sell. It was the heart of social interaction, a place where news was exchanged and ideas were shared. It was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and traditions, where people from different backgrounds came together. Whether you were trading a cloak for cacao beans or negotiating the price of a live turkey, every transaction was a dance that required skill, patience, and a touch of charm. And as we continue our journey through this fascinating world, remember, the Aztecs were masters of their craft, blending commerce with culture, necessity with luxury. They understood that trade was not just about goods, but about connections, influence, and power. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the lives of those who thrived in this dynamic marketplace, exploring the intricate balance of power, commerce, and society. There's much more to uncover in the world of the Aztecs, where every day was a high-stakes adventure. As we dive deeper into the Aztec marketplace, let's tackle the unsung heroes of economic fairness and justice, the market judges. These folks weren't just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, were the unsung referees in the high-stakes game of Aztec commerce. Imagine the marketplace as a bustling stock exchange, where every trader was a potential wolf of Wall Street, except instead of insider trading, they were bartering jaguar skins for obsidian blades. And just like any good referee, the market judges were there to blow the whistle on anyone trying to pull a fast one. The Aztecs, in their wisdom, knew that a market without rules would be chaos incarnate. So, they established a set of laws that would make any modern regulator nod approvingly. These laws were no joke. Fraudsters could face anything from fines to corporal punishment, depending on the severity of their deceit. Picture this. You're caught selling a cotton cloak that's more polyester than Pima cotton, and suddenly you're facing a public shaming or worse. The Aztecs didn't just slap you on the wrist with a fine. They believed in a little something called deterrence. The market judges, or Tanquistly, were the ones ensuring this delicate balance of order. They weren't just paper pushers. These were seasoned veterans of the trading game. They knew the tricks of the trade and were adept at sniffing out any shady dealings. And if you thought you could grease a few palms to get away with it, think again. These judges were chosen for their integrity and impartiality. In a society where social status could mean everything, these judges were expected to be as incorruptible as the obsidian blades they regulated. But let's not get too carried away with the idea of a perfectly harmonious market. While the laws were designed to protect fairness, the reality was that traders operated in a world where the stakes were high, and the margin for error was razor-thin. Traders who overstepped or got caught in the wrong deal had more than just their reputations on the line. They risked their livelihoods, and in some cases, their freedom. If you were found guilty of fraud, the punishment could be swift and severe, ranging from hefty fines to public lashings. Talk about a harsh reality check. Now, let's pivot to an often overlooked aspect of the marketplace that made all this possible: the architecture. This wasn't just a haphazard open space with vendors setting up shop willy-nilly. Tlatelolco was a carefully designed marvel of urban planning, with designated areas for different types of goods. It was like a medieval shopping mall, but instead of air conditioning and escalators, you had open skies and dirt paths. The layout was crucial for facilitating trade, ensuring that goods could be moved efficiently and that buyers knew exactly where to go for what they needed. The marketplace was divided into sections for food, textiles, luxury items, and even live animals. Each section was strategically located to manage the flow of people and goods. This wasn't just about convenience. It was about maximizing trade efficiency and minimizing chaos. Imagine the logistics of moving thousands of people and countless goods every single day without modern technology. The Aztecs had it down to a science, ensuring that the market could handle the constant influx of traders, buyers, and curious onlookers. Despite the romanticized view of a bustling market, alive with the sound of haggling and the scent of exotic spices, the reality was a bit more complex. The architecture of the market was designed not just for trade, but also for control. There were designated entry and exit points, making it easier to monitor who was coming and going. This wasn't just about keeping out riffraff. It was about maintaining order in what was essentially the economic heart of the empire. In a place where a single trade could ripple through the economy, control was everything. So, while the legend of the Aztec marketplace paints a picture of harmony and prosperity, the reality was a world where traders navigated a minefield of laws and penalties, all under the watchful eyes of the market judges. It was a place where architecture met economics, and every transaction was a dance of survival. The Aztec marketplace was a microcosm of the empire itself, a place where power, commerce, and culture intertwined in a complex dance that kept the wheels of civilization turning. As we continue this journey, remember that the Aztecs were masters of balance. They understood that the marketplace was more than just a place to buy and sell. It was the lifeblood of their society, a place where the rules of the game were just as important as the players. So, as we delve further into this world, keep in mind that every trade, every law, and every building was part of a grand design, a design that ensured the Aztec Empire thrived, even in the face of adversity. Stay with us as we explore more of this intricate tapestry, uncovering the stories and realities that made the Aztec marketplace a marvel of its time. As the Aztec marketplace hummed along, a juggernaut of commerce and culture, it's not hard to see how this buzzing hub became the lifeline of an empire that spanned over 200,000 square kilometers at its peak. And yet, for all their prowess in trade and governance, the Aztecs couldn't foresee the tidal wave that was about to crash upon their shores: the Spanish conquistadors. Led by Hernán Cortés in 1519, these newcomers were not browsing for bargains. They were looking to conquer and plunder. The fall of the Aztec Empire is a case study in how quickly things can unravel when an unstoppable force meets a seemingly immovable object. Within a mere 2 years, the vast and sophisticated Aztec civilization crumbled under the weight of superior weaponry, European diseases like smallpox, and a lethal cocktail of betrayal and alliances. By 1521, Tenochtitlan was a smoldering ruin, and the Aztec world had changed forever. But let's not just focus on the doom and gloom. There's a silver lining here, albeit a tarnished one. With the Spanish takeover, the vibrant market practices of the Aztecs didn't just vanish into thin air, they evolved. You see, the Spanish were smart enough to realize that the Aztecs had something good going. They were like the corporate raiders of their time, hostile takeover artists who knew that completely dismantling the market systems would be akin to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Instead, they adapted these systems to suit their own needs, maintaining the market structures and even the use of cacao beans as currency for a while. It's a classic case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, with a side of, but make sure it works for us. The Spanish didn't just inherit a market, they walked into an economic powerhouse. They were like kids in a candy store, except this candy store had gold, spices, and a workforce ready to be exploited. The Parchdecker, those intrepid traders, found themselves in a new role. While some faded into obscurity, others adapted, becoming intermediaries between the indigenous population and the Spanish overlords. It was a shift that required as much cunning and resilience as their original trade routes, only this time with a different set of rules and players. And here's the kicker. While the Spanish may have brought swords and ships, they couldn't quash the spirit of commerce. The marketplaces continued to thrive, albeit under new management. The hustle and bustle of Tlaxcalco persisted, a testament to the enduring nature of trade as a human endeavor. The Aztecs' legacy lived on in the form of colonial markets that still bore the fingerprints of their original architects. This wasn't just a case of cultural assimilation. It was a testament to the resilience of a system and a people who understood the art of the trade better than most. Now, let's delve into the lessons we can glean from these ancient traders, who, let's face it, would probably do quite well on Wall Street today. The first lesson is adaptability. The Aztecs were masters at reading the room, or in this case, the marketplace, understood the importance of diversification long before it became a buzzword in modern economics. Whether it was cacao beans or obsidian blades, they knew that having a varied portfolio was key to weathering economic storms. Next, there's the lesson of resilience. The Aztecs didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas, cultures, and influences. This exchange made their markets vibrant and diverse, and while the Spanish conquest was undoubtedly a cataclysmic event, the underlying trading culture didn't just disappear. It adapted and evolved, providing a blueprint for how societies can survive even the most dramatic changes. And finally, let's talk about the power of myth and reality. The romanticized image of the Aztec marketplace as a harmonious, bustling paradise is just that, a myth. In reality, it was a place of fierce competition, strict regulations, and social hierarchies. Yet, it's this very tension between myth and reality that makes history so compelling. The Aztecs were not just builders of pyramids and sacrificers of captives. They were astute economists, savvy politicians, and dare I say, proto-capitalists. In conclusion, the legacy of the Aztec marketplace is one of enduring influence. It's a legacy that speaks to the universal human drive for trade and connection, the ability to adapt and innovate, and the resilience to rise from the ashes. So next time you're in a bustling market or scrolling through an online store, spare a thought for the Aztecs. They were navigating the complexities of commerce long before the digital age, with a blend of savvy and style that still echoes through the corridors of history. And as we reflect on this vibrant world, remember, the marketplace was more than just an economic hub. It was the heartbeat of a civilization that, despite its fall, continues to inspire and educate. In the bustling streets of ancient Athens, around the early 6th century BCE, you might hear something like, "Hey, can I borrow a cup of olive oil? Oh, and by the way, do you own my house yet?" Because, believe it or not, debt slavery was so common it might as well have been the city's unofficial pastime. Athens, far from being the cradle of democracy we often romantically envision, was more like a social powder keg ready to explode, with economic disparities that would make modern inequality look like a minor inconvenience. Let's paint the scene. Athens was a place where the rich could practically swim in their wealth, probably using amphorae as floaties. Meanwhile, the poor were lucky if they could keep their heads above water, metaphorically speaking, because real water, that was for the rich too. The city was dominated by a class of wealthy aristocrats who controlled the land, the money, and pretty much everything except the weather. If you weren't part of this elite club, Your chances of getting ahead were about as good as a snowball surviving in the Athenian sun. Debt was the name of the game. It wasn't like today's kind of debt, where you just get annoying calls from the bank. No, this was the sort where failing to pay back a loan could land you, and sometimes even your family, into slavery. Your average Athenian might wake up to find himself on the wrong side of a financial contract, and bam, instant bondsman. It's no wonder that civil unrest was as common as pigeons in the agora. Now, who were these unfortunate souls? They were the Thetes, the lowest class of free men, who, despite their status as free, were only a bad harvest away from servitude. Their plight was so dire that they couldn't even afford the proverbial pot to cook their lentils in, assuming they could afford lentils in the first place. Above them were the Zeugitai, who owned enough land to scrape by, but not enough to influence political decisions. The Pentakosiomdimnoi, the top dogs, were the ones who measured their wealth in medimnoi, loads of grain, if you're wondering. These were the folks who debate the finer points of politics, while everyone else debated whether they'd have enough to eat that week. Athens, therefore, was a city teetering dangerously close to chaos. It was like a pot of boiling soup with a cracked lid. One wrong move, and you'd have a mess on your hands. Enter Solon, the man of the hour, though at this point he's still in the wings, waiting to take the stage. But before we get to him, let's linger a bit more on this tumultuous scene, because context is everything. The political landscape was about as stable as a one-legged table. The city-state was run by a small group of archons, who, to put it mildly, were not exactly the paragons of fair governance. These were the folks who'd throw laws around like confetti, as long as those laws kept them in power and wealth. The ecclesia, or assembly, was technically open to all citizens, but when the agenda was set by the rich, it's not like the common man could do much more than shout into the wind. Now, if you're thinking, why didn't they just revolt? Well, they tried. The problem was, every time a leader emerged promising change, they either got co-opted by the elite or ended up with a mysterious case of disappeared. Pisistratus, for example, was a tyrant with a knack for entering and exiting power like a revolving door. He'd pop up, promise reforms, and then, surprise, align himself with the aristocracy. What made Athens particularly itchy was the concept of stasis, a type of civil strife that was practically an Athenian tradition. Imagine a city where factionalism was so ingrained it was almost a sport. Every few years, like clockwork, you'd have groups vying for power, and the resulting chaos was less Game of Thrones and more Game of Groans. Rich landowners had another weapon in their arsenal, the concept of hectomoroi, or sixth parters. These were tenant farmers who had to give a sixth of their produce to their wealthy landlords. Think of it as a tax where the benefits were as one-sided as a rigged dice game. This system was a surefire way to keep the poor perpetually indebted, and it worked like a charm, if your idea of charm is total economic oppression. Amidst this cacophony of social injustice, the city itself was a bustling hub, a place where trade routes converged and cultures clashed. You could find merchants selling everything from Egyptian papyrus to Lydian gold. Athens was perfectly situated to thrive economically, yet internally it was a mess. The city had all the ingredients for greatness, but no recipe to mix them without causing a disaster. So, the stage is set. A city of stark contrasts, where the Acropolis loomed over bustling markets, and ideas flowed as freely as wine. Yet beneath this veneer of prosperity lay a brewing storm, fueled by economic inequality and political exclusion. It was a city that needed a hero, or at least someone with a plan. And that's where Solon, the reluctant reformer, would eventually step in. But for now, let's savor this moment of chaos, because nothing makes a hero's entrance more dramatic than a city on the verge of tearing itself apart. In this swirling vortex of chaos and potential enters Solon, the man many would later dub a hero, though he might have scoffed at the title himself. Solon wasn't just some knight in shining armor swooping in to save the day. He was more like the shrewd chess player who saw several moves ahead. Born around 630 BCE, Solon was no ordinary Athenian. He hailed from the aristocracy, but not the kind that lounged around counting medimnoi for fun. His family was respectable, yet not obscenely wealthy, which gave him a taste of both privilege and the realities faced by the less fortunate. Solon cut his teeth in the world of commerce, journeying far and wide, rubbing shoulders with merchants and traders, and soaking up the cultural osmosis that came from being smack in the middle of Mediterranean trade routes. He wasn't just learning business, he was learning people. This savvy, street-smart education would later inform his reforms, as he understood that the economy wasn't just about numbers, it was about lives. Now, let's talk poetry. Why? Because Solon was quite the wordsmith. If Twitter had existed in ancient Athens, Solon would have been the guy with 1 million followers, dropping truth bombs in 280 characters or less. His poetry wasn't just fluff, it was filled with social commentary. He wasn't afraid to call out both the rich and the poor, pointing out their flaws with the kind of eloquence that made people stop and think. And perhaps that's why his words carried weight. They were grounded in reality and presented with a lyrical flair that made them stick. But let's not get carried away with the image of Solon as the altruistic bard. This guy knew how to work a room. He wasn't just a poet with ideals. He was a politician with an agenda. Solon saw the cracks in the Athenian system and realized that if something wasn't done, the whole city might implode. So, when the call came for someone to step up and untangle this Gordian knot of social unrest, Solon was the obvious but reluctant choice. Reluctant, you ask? Absolutely. Solon was no fool. He knew that stepping into the political arena was a bit like stepping into a lion's den wearing a meat suit. The power struggles, the potential for failure, the almost guaranteed backlash. Who in their right mind would want that? Yet, despite his reservations, or maybe because he recognized that sometimes the reluctant leader is the best kind, Solon took the plunge. And thus began Solon's dance with reform. He wasn't about to just slap a band-aid on Athens' problems. This was a man with a vision, and not the kind that involved grand speeches and empty promises. Solon's approach was pragmatic, surgical even. He aimed to strike a balance, which in a city as polarized as Athens was akin to walking a tightrope over a pit of hungry crocodiles. One of his first moves was to address the debt crisis head-on. We mentioned debt slavery, right? Well, Solon decided it was time to shake things up like a snow globe. He introduced the sasech there, or shaking off of burdens. This wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a radical policy that cancelled debts and freed those who had been enslaved due to their financial woes. Imagine telling the rich landowners that their human collateral was now null and void. It was like Solon had just flipped the monopoly board in the middle of the game. But Solon wasn't just about erasing debts. He was about creating a system where such debts wouldn't become an issue again. He implemented economic reforms that encouraged trade and production, opening up the Athenian market to new possibilities. By standardizing weights and measures, and even tweaking the currency, Solon laid the groundwork for Athens to become a commercial powerhouse. Politically, Solon's reforms were like a fresh breeze through a stale room. He reorganized the political structure, breaking the aristocracy's stranglehold on power. He did this by dividing citizens into 4 classes based on wealth rather than birth, which was a revolutionary idea at the time. It was like switching from a VIP-only club to a place where your merit could actually get you a seat at the table. The Pentecosion Hippes, Zeugitai, and Thetes now had roles defined by what they could contribute, not just who their parents were. Solon also established the Boule, a council of 400 that gave citizens more say in governance. It was a step towards democracy, though calling it democracy as we know it would be a bit of a stretch. Still, it was a significant shift from the oligarchic status quo. Yet, even as he opened up the political scene, Solon was careful not to swing the pendulum too far. His reforms were like a carefully tuned orchestra, each instrument playing its part to create harmony rather than chaos. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with Solon's reforms. The rich grumbled about losing their grip on the city's economic throat, while the poor questioned why he hadn't gone further. But that's the thing about being a reformer. You can't please everyone. Solon knew this, and he embraced it, much like a comedian dealing with a tough crowd. He wasn't looking for applause. He was looking for impact. Despite the grumbling, Solon's reforms set Athens on a new path. They didn't solve every problem overnight. Far from it. But they created a framework that could evolve, a foundation that future leaders could build upon. And that's the real genius of Solon. He wasn't just a one-hit wonder. He was the opening act for the grand show that would eventually become the classical Athenian democracy. As for Solon himself, after putting his reforms in place, he did something that might surprise you. he left. Yeah, he packed his bags and set off on a 10-year trip abroad. Why? Well, he knew that sticking around would only fuel the flames of discontent. By removing himself from the equation, he allowed his reforms to take root without his presence becoming a distraction. It was a move as strategic as it was poetic, leaving the stage before the encore, trusting the music to play on. So there you have it. Solon, not just the poetic reformer, but the savvy political operator who managed to pull off one of history's most impressive balancing acts. He was no saint, but he didn't need to be. He was human, with all the complexities that entails, and perhaps that's what makes his story enduring. Solon understood that sometimes the best you can do is nudge the world in the right direction and hope the momentum carries it forward. As Athens stood on the cusp of change, Solon's legacy was just beginning, his parting words echoing through the years. I gave them such laws as neither side could justly complain of. And so, Solon set off on his self-imposed exile, leaving behind a city that was, for once, not on the brink of devouring itself. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Athens wasn't exactly transformed overnight into a utopia of peace and prosperity. Instead, Solon's reforms were more like giving the city a sturdy pair of crutches to hobble along while its metaphorical bones healed. The crutches in question. Well, let's dive into the details, shall we? Let's start with the Sasech there, Solon's piece de resistance. This shaking off of burdens was a radical move, akin to declaring a debt jubilee. It was like Solon had just thrown the financial equivalent of a pizza party, wiping away the debts that had shackled many Athenians into slavery. Thousands of Athenians who had found themselves in bondage due to unpaid debts were suddenly free, released from the chains that bound them to their creditors. It's estimated that this reform liberated an entire class of people, turning debt slaves back into free citizens, though likely with a newfound wariness of IOUs. But was this reform truly revolutionary, or simply a clever tactic to keep Athens from imploding like a poorly made soufflé? The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in between. Solon's reforms didn't dismantle the existing power structures entirely. While the Sasech there was a bold stroke, it didn't redistribute land or wealth. The wealthy Pentecosion still held the lion's share of the land and resources. So, while Solon threw the common folk a life-preserver, he wasn't exactly redistributing the ship's treasure. What Solon did do was to introduce economic reforms that opened new doors for Athens. By standardizing weights and measures, he ensured that trade could flourish free from the petty corruption that had plagued the city like a bad rash. This wasn't just a token gesture. It laid the groundwork for Athens to become a commercial hub. Imagine being able to trade without wondering if your neighbor was skimming off the top. It was revolutionary in its simplicity. Then there was the matter of currency. Solon made sure that the Athenian economy ran on a currency that was stable and recognizable, not unlike choosing a reliable currency exchange app today. This was crucial because it allowed Athens to trade more effectively, both internally and with other city-states. It was a move that echoed through the centuries, setting the stage for Athens' later economic dominance. Politically, Solon was like a chef, engineering a delicate dish, carefully balancing the flavors of power and responsibility. By reorganizing the citizenry into 4 wealth-based classes, he effectively diluted the aristocracy's grip on power without tossing it out the window entirely. The Pentecosion still retained their influence, but now the other classes had a voice, however small, in the political arena. This was a revolutionary concept at the time, a hint of democracy in an oligarchic stew. The establishment of the Boule, a council of 400 citizens, was another of Solon's masterstrokes. It was like giving the common man a seat at the table, even if he was still stuck at the kiddie end. This council had the power to set the agenda for the ecclesia, the assembly of citizens. It wasn't democracy as we understand it, but it was a step in the right direction, a small nudge towards a political culture that valued collective decision-making. And what about those pesky hectomoroi? Solon's reforms meant the end of their brutal sixth-part obligations. No longer would they have to funnel a chunk of their produce to wealthy landlords, a practice that had kept them in a cycle of poverty. This was Solon's way of telling the aristocrats, enough is enough, while simultaneously giving the common man a fighting chance to improve his lot in life. Yet, for all his foresight, Solon was no miracle worker. His reforms were like planting seeds in rocky soil. Some took root, while others struggled to survive. The rich weren't exactly thrilled about losing their economic stranglehold, and the poor felt Solon hadn't gone far enough. You could say he was walking the tightrope of reform with one eye on the ground, well aware that a misstep could send him, and Athens plummeting. Solon's genius lay in his ability to navigate this treacherous terrain with a pragmatism that belied his poetic nature. He wasn't interested in grandiose visions of utopia. Instead, he focused on creating a framework that could evolve, a system that allowed for adaptation and growth. In doing so, he laid the foundation for what would eventually become the classical Athenian democracy, a society where, for the first time, the voice of the many began to matter. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Solon's immediate impact was a city in transition, a place where the old ways were beginning to give way to the new. It wasn't a smooth process, and there were plenty of bumps along the way. The Athenians, like any good audience, took their time warming up to Solon's reforms. Some saw him as a savior, others as an agitator who'd upset the delicate balance of power. But that's the thing about change. It rarely comes without a bit of turbulence. In the aftermath of Solon's reforms, Athens found itself standing at a crossroads. The old aristocratic order had been shaken, but not toppled. The seeds of democracy had been sown, yet the soil was still rocky and uncertain. Solon's absence, during his decade-long sojourn, allowed these changes to take root without his presence muddying the waters. It was a strategic move, reminder that sometimes the best way to lead is to step back and let others take the reins. So, was Solon the revolutionary Athens needed, or just a clever tactician with an eye for the main chance? Perhaps he was both, a complicated figure straddling the line between legend and reality. His reforms were neither a panacea nor a placebo. They were a starting point, an invitation for future generations to continue the work he'd begun. As we leave Solon's Athens, poised on the brink of transformation, one thing is clear. In a city that was once a powder keg of inequality and unrest, Solon had managed to light a different kind of fire, a spark of hope that things could, indeed, change. And while his legacy would be debated, celebrated, and occasionally derided over the centuries, there's no denying that Solon had given Athens something it desperately needed, the chance to rewrite its own story. As Athens stood on the verge of rewriting its story, Solon's reforms were the opening act. But as any good playwright knows, the real drama unfolds in the acts that follow. Solon's grand experiment in social engineering was the catalyst Athens needed, but the aftershocks of his reforms would ripple through the city-state for generations. Let's dive into the aftermath, where the seeds of democracy were sown in soil still littered with the debris of aristocratic privilege. First, let's talk about those pesky aristocrats. Solon might have clipped their wings, but he didn't exactly send them packing. The wealthy still held considerable sway, their influence woven into the fabric of Athenian society like a particularly stubborn stain. These were the folks who had spent generations perfecting the art of political maneuvering, and they weren't about to let a little thing like reforms stop them. In the years following Solon's departure, Athens became a hotbed of political intrigue, a veritable Game of Thrones where alliances shifted as quickly as the winds on Mount Lycabettus. The Boule, that council of 400 citizens, was one of Solon's most significant contributions. Yet, it was also a double-edged sword. While it gave a broader swath of Athenians a voice, it also provided a platform for political machinations that would make Machiavelli blush. The Boule was a place where deals were struck, favors exchanged, and rivalries festered like a bad wound. It was democracy in its infancy, and like any newborn, it was messy, unpredictable, and prone to explosive outbursts. Then there was the ecclesia, the assembly of citizens. Solon's reforms had opened the doors of the ecclesia to more people than ever before, but let's not pretend it was a utopia of egalitarianism. The Pentacosium Dimnoi and Hippes, those with wealth and the means to take time off from their daily grind, dominated the proceedings. The Thetes, the lowest class of free citizens, might have had a seat at the table, but they were more often than not relegated to the fringes, their voices drowned out by the din of wealthier interests. And let's not forget the economy, that eternal thorn in the side of any would-be reformer. Solon's economic measures had been a step in the right direction. but they weren't a magic bullet. The city-state was still deeply divided along economic lines, and the gap between the haves and have-nots was more of a chasm. The Sasech there had freed many from the burden of debt slavery, but it hadn't erased the fundamental inequalities that plagued Athenian society. Those who had land and resources continued to prosper, while those without were left to scramble for scraps. As Athens grappled with these growing pains, the spectre of stasis loomed large. This wasn't just civil strife. It was a cultural institution, as Athenian as olives and philosophers. Solon's reforms had attempted to quell the flames of factionalism, but they remained smoldering beneath the surface, ready to ignite at the slightest provocation. And ignite they did, with alarming regularity. Factionalism was the name of the game, and it was a game played with ruthless efficiency by those seeking power. Take the case of Pisistratus, the tyrant with a penchant for dramatic comebacks. In the decades following Solon's reforms, Pisistratus took center stage, seizing power not once, not twice, but thrice. His rise to power was a testament to the enduring influence of the aristocracy, as well as the persistent dissatisfaction among the lower classes. Pisistratus was a master of political theater, entering Athens with a woman dressed as Athena in a bid to legitimize his rule. It was a move that would make even the most jaded political strategist raise an eyebrow. Pisistratus's reign, though marked by tyranny, was also a period of relative stability. He understood that to maintain power, he needed to keep the populace content, or at least distracted. Under his rule, Athens saw an increase in public works, festivals, and cultural patronage. The city might have been under the thumb of a tyrant, but it was also blossoming as a center of art and culture. It was a contradiction that Athens would become known for, a place where democracy and despotism danced an uneasy waltz. Yet, even as Athens basked in this cultural renaissance, the seeds of discord were quietly germinating. The balance of power was a delicate affair, and the slightest shift could send the city spiraling into chaos. The aristocrats, though sidelined by Solon's reforms, were far from defeated. They bided their time, sharpening their knives in the shadows, waiting for the moment to reclaim their dominance. The aftermath of Solon's reforms was a period of both promise and peril, a time when the foundations of democracy were laid, even as the forces of oligarchy plotted their resurgence. It was a testament to the complexity of human nature, that even in the pursuit of justice, the old ways would not easily be cast aside. Solon's vision of a more equitable society was noble, but the reality was a tangled web of competing interests and entrenched power structures. His reforms had set the stage for change, but they had also left plenty of room for conflict. Athens was a city in transition, its citizens caught between the old world and the new, their future uncertain. As the story of Athens continued to unfold, the lessons of Solon's era would echo through the centuries. His legacy was not a tidy resolution, but an ongoing struggle, a reminder that the path to democracy is fraught with challenges, and that the quest for justice is, more often than not, a marathon rather than a sprint. So, as we leave Athens at this pivotal moment, remember that history is not a linear narrative, but a series of interconnected stories, each with its own twists and turns. Solon's reforms were just one chapter in the saga of Athenian democracy, story that was far from over. And as we'll see, the road ahead will be anything but smooth. As we leave Athens at this pivotal moment, remember that history is not a linear narrative, but a series of interconnected stories, each with its own twists and turns. Solon's reforms were just one chapter in the saga of Athenian democracy, a story that was far from over. And as we'll see, the road ahead will be anything but smooth. Solon's legacy, however, has weathered the centuries, becoming a tapestry of fact and fiction, woven together in a way that even the most skilled weaver would envy. Let's start with the myth-making. Over the years, Solon has been elevated to near-mythical status, hailed as the founding father of democracy, a title that, while flattering, might have made the man himself chuckle. Solon's reputation has been burnished by time, polished to a shine by those who came after him, eager to cast him as a visionary. But let's not kid ourselves. Solon wasn't some oracle with a crystal ball. He was a pragmatic reformer, more interested in stabilizing a city teetering on the brink of collapse than in laying the groundwork for democracy as we know it. Yet, the allure of the myth persists, perhaps because it offers a neat narrative, a single man who, through sheer force of will and wisdom, set Athens on the path to greatness. It's a story that appeals to our love of heroes, those larger-than-life figures who emerge from chaos to lead the way. But as with most legends, the truth is more nuanced. Solon's reforms were less about visionary foresight and more about damage control. He was, in many ways, a man trying to clean up a mess that was threatening to engulf Athens in civil war. Consider the context. Athens in Solon's time was a pressure cooker of social and economic tensions. The city was a powder keg, with class divisions so stark they could make modern inequality look like a minor squabble. Solon's measures, like the Sasech there, were intended to diffuse this tension, to prevent the city from tearing itself apart at the seams. They were pragmatic solutions to immediate problems, not blueprints for a democratic utopia. Yet, it's precisely this pragmatism that makes Solon's legacy so compelling. By addressing the immediate crises with practical solutions, he inadvertently laid the foundation for future democratic developments. His reforms created a more inclusive political system, albeit one still dominated by the wealthy, and set a precedent for future leaders to build upon. In this way, Solon's legacy is both accidental and intentional, a reminder that sometimes the greatest contributions to history come not from grand designs, but from the messy, often chaotic business of problem-solving. Over time, the romanticized image of Solon has overshadowed the gritty reality of his reforms. He's often depicted as a sage-like figure, a sort of ancient Greek Yoda dispensing wisdom in pithy aphorisms. And while it's true that Solon was a poet, his verses were less about lofty ideals and more about the stark realities of Athenian life. His poetry was a form of social commentary, a way to critique the excesses of the rich and the complacency of the poor. It was a tool for reflection and change, not just an artistic indulgence. But myths have a way of sticking, and Solon's has endured because it offers a comforting narrative. That one man's vision can change the course of history. It's a story that resonates, particularly in times of upheaval, when the world seems in need of a guiding hand. Yet, the real Solon was less a solitary hero and more a canny operator, navigating the treacherous waters of Athenian politics with a deftness that would make modern spin doctors green with envy. So, where does this leave us? Solon's legacy is a study in contrasts, a blend of myth and reality that reflects the complexities of human nature. On one hand, we have the legend, the wise lawgiver who laid the foundations for democracy. On the other, the reality, a pragmatic reformer dealing with a city on the edge of chaos. Both are true in their way, and both offer valuable lessons. The romanticized Solon reminds us of the power of narrative, of the ways in which history can be shaped and reshaped to fit the needs of the present. It's a reminder that the stories we tell about the past are often as revealing about us as they are about the people who lived them. The real Solon, meanwhile, offers a lesson in pragmatism, a reminder that change often comes not from grandiose visions, but from the hard, unglamorous work of addressing immediate challenges. As we wrap up this look at Solon's legacy, let's take a moment to appreciate the messy, contradictory nature of history. The past is not a neat, linear tale, but a tapestry of stories, each thread contributing to the whole. Solon's story is just one of these threads, woven into the fabric of Athenian democracy, a reminder that even amidst chaos, there's room for hope, change, and yes, a bit of myth-making. In the end, Solon's legacy is a testament to the human capacity for adaptation and resilience. His reforms, though imperfect, set Athens on a path toward a more inclusive society, one in which the voices of many, not just the privileged few, could be heard. It's a legacy that continues to resonate, a reminder that even in times of turmoil, there's always the possibility of a better future. So, was Solon a visionary, or just a guy trying to clean up a mess? Perhaps he was a bit of both. And maybe that's what makes his story so enduring, a reminder that the line between myth and reality is often as blurred as the Athenian skyline at dusk. As we close the book on Solon's chapter in history, let's carry with us the lessons of his legacy. That change is possible, that myths can inspire, and that the past, with all its contradictions, still has much to teach us. If you ever think urban planning is a modern concept, let's head back to a time when Alexander the Great was just a glint in his ancestors' eyes, and the Greeks were still figuring out how democracy worked. Enter the Harappan civilization, also known as the Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished from around 3300 BCE to 1300 BCE. It was nestled in what is today Pakistan and northwest India, sprawling over a whopping 25 million square kilometers. Imagine a civilization so vast it made Egypt and Mesopotamia look like they were playing in the kiddie pool. Now, let's fast forward to the 1920s, a time when flappers were dancing the Charleston and archaeologists were digging up Jazz-Age dirt. And by dirt, I mean ancient ruins. That's when the Harappan civilization decided to make a grand re-entrance into our history books. British archaeologist Sir John Marshall and his crew unearthed the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, sparking a revelation that essentially said, yeah, there's more to ancient history than Greece and Rome, folks. With its discovery, the Harappan civilization promptly threw a wrench into the popular narrative that the wheel of civilization began in the Fertile Crescent. Here was a complex society with its own script, trade networks, and city planning that seemed more modern than some of today's urban nightmares. I mean, how many ancient cities do you know that had a comprehensive drainage system? Meanwhile, I'm still waiting for my street to get repaved. The Harappan cities were a marvel of urban design, laid out in a grid pattern that would make any modern city planner weep with jealousy, or maybe frustration, considering how things are going today. Streets ran straight as arrows, intersecting each other at right angles. The blocks were like those of a contemporary city, but without the endless Starbucks and confusing one-way systems. Imagine a place where you didn't need a GPS to navigate. But seriously, let's talk about that drainage system. While some modern cities struggle with a bit of rain, the Harappans had covered drains running alongside their streets with strategically placed manholes for cleaning. These folks had figured out sanitation thousands of years before the rest of the world caught on. It's as if they had a time-traveling consultant from 21st century Tokyo advising them. On top of that, the architecture was nothing short of genius. Most houses were made of uniformly baked bricks, a construction choice that has held up pretty well, considering they were built over 4,000 years ago. Inside, the homes boasted structures like courtyards, wells, and even private bathrooms. Meanwhile, in medieval Europe, indoor plumbing was still a distant dream. And let's not forget the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, which sounds like the name of a luxury spa, but was actually a massive public bathing area. It was built with watertight bricks and featured a sophisticated drainage system, suggesting that cleanliness possibly had spiritual or social significance. Imagine a community that prioritized hygiene before anyone knew germs even existed. A public bath that was actually clean, unlike the gym showers you avoid at all costs. With all these innovations, you'd think the Harappans were living in some kind of ancient utopia. But the reality, as always, was more complex. Despite their apparent sophistication, we still don't know much about their political or social hierarchy. There's no evidence of palaces or grand temples, which might indicate a society that was more egalitarian than its contemporaries. Or maybe they just didn't have Instagram to show off their latest architectural wonders. What we do know is that the Harappans were master traders, dealing in goods like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and textiles. Their trade networks stretched as far as Mesopotamia, which was no small feat considering the lack of FedEx back then. They had standardized weights and measures, which suggests a level of economic organization that would make any accountant nod in approval. Yet, for all their brilliance, the Harappan script remains undeciphered, leaving us with more questions than answers about their social structure and daily lives. It's like having a blockbuster movie with an indecipherable script, visually stunning, but leaving you scratching your head over the plot. Maybe they were just too advanced for us, or the Rosetta Stone equivalent is out there waiting to be found. In any case, the Harappan civilization was a 1,000-piece puzzle we're still trying to solve. Their rediscovery in the 1920s sent ripples through the academic world, challenging the Eurocentric view of history and reminding us that human ingenuity isn't confined to the Western world. It's a humbling reminder that sometimes the past had its act together better than we do today. So the next time you find yourself stuck in traffic, cursing city planners, spare a thought for the Harappans, who were doing it all without Google Maps and still managed to keep their streets clear and their cities running smoothly. And speaking of keeping things running smoothly, let's dive into the bustling economic world of the Harappans, a society that was trading like it had its own ancient Amazon prime, minus the 2-day shipping. These folks weren't just sitting around in their well-planned cities admiring the view. No, they were busy making connections that spanned all the way to Mesopotamia, over 2,000 kilometers away. That's a serious commute, even without the option to book a red-eye flight. Now, let's talk goods. The Harappans were all about that bling, trading precious stones like lapis lazuli, which they sourced from what is now Afghanistan. This wasn't just some backyard swap meet. We're talking about a sophisticated trade network. Lapis lazuli, with its deep blue hue, was the ancient world's equivalent of a luxury brand handbag. Just imagine the Harappans strutting into Mesopotamian markets, gleaming with the kind of swag that would make a Kardashian envious. But it wasn't just about shiny rocks. The Harappans were also big on carnelian, another semi-precious stone, and they crafted exquisite beads that would make any jewelry designer drool. These beads were shipped off to Mesopotamia, where they adorned the necks of the elite, proving that the Harappans knew a thing or two about style. And let's not forget textiles. Although they didn't have the high-speed looms of the Industrial Revolution, their skill in fabric making was renowned, with cotton being one of their key exports. One of the most intriguing pieces of the Harappan trade puzzle is the mysterious seals they left behind. These small, carved stones, often made from steedite, are like tiny ancient business cards, minus the cheesy email signature. Each seal is unique, featuring intricate carvings of animals, deities, and what might be a script, though we still have no clue what it says. These seals have been found all over Mesopotamia, acting like a made-by-Harappans stamp on traded goods, showcasing their reach and influence. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or the lack thereof. The Harappans' monetary system, or rather, their lack of one. That's right, no coins, no paper money, not even a barter system that's easy to pin down. It seems they managed their trade networks without a clear currency, relying perhaps on standardized weights and measures. Picture this: a Harappan trader in a bustling market, haggling over a shipment of lapis lazuli with nothing but a set of scales and a great sense of humor. Who needs a buy now button when you've got charm and a knack for negotiation? The absence of a monetary system, as we know it, might sound like chaos, but it speaks volumes about how organized and trustworthy these trade networks must have been. Imagine the level of trust required to ship goods across the ancient world, relying on the integrity of your trading partners. It's a bit like ordering something online and trusting it'll arrive, except your order is a shipment of precious stones, and the delivery window is a few months, not 2 days. Now, you might be thinking, what about taxes or banking? The Harappans seem to have sidestepped these financial headaches. Without a clear sign of a centralized government imposing taxes, it's possible they operated on a more localized, community-based system. Or maybe they just didn't have the heart to invent the IRS of the ancient world, an oversight for which we can all be grateful. And what happened when trade disputes arose? Without a court system to settle things, you'd imagine negotiations were as much about reputation as they were about goods. It's a bit like your favorite TV drama, where alliances and rivalries play out, but with more beads and bricks than backstabbing billionaires. Despite the lack of a decipherable script, the Harappans left behind a legacy of trade that's nothing short of remarkable. Their networks pulled together a web of connections that stretched far beyond their borders, a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability. So next time you're grumbling over shipping fees or the mysterious disappearance of that package you ordered, remember the Harappans, who built a thriving economy without a single tracking number. While the Harappans were busy trading lapis lazuli and carnelian like there was no tomorrow, Mesopotamia was going through its own version of retail therapy. The Mesopotamians must have been as excited to receive Harappan goods as we are about a new season on Netflix. The allure of foreign goods has always been a powerful force, and the Harappans knew how to play the game. As we continue to dig into their economic life, remember that while we're unraveling an ancient mystery, we're also peeling back layers on a society that thrived on complexity and collaboration. Their trade networks are a reminder of a time when human ingenuity and cultural exchange were the real currency, in a world where borders were as fluid as the rivers they navigated. Stay tuned as we venture further into the lives of these remarkable people, exploring more of what made the Harappan civilization a powerhouse of its time. As we piece together the puzzle of their economic life, we're reminded that history is much like a Harappan seal, full of intricate details waiting to be uncovered. So, as we unravel the Harappan mystery more intricately than a detective novel with no clear protagonist, let's turn our gaze to the social tapestry, or lack thereof, woven into this ancient civilization. We're diving headfirst into the enigmatic world of Harappan society, where social hierarchy is as elusive as their undeciphered script. First things first, what do we know about the Harappan social structure? Well, not much in terms of hard evidence. In fact, it's like trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and the barks nowhere in sight. Our main clues come from archaeological remains, which, unlike your chatty neighbor, don't spill all the beans. But what these silent relics suggest is rather intriguing. A society that might have been more egalitarian than any toga-clad Roman patrician would dare to dream. Let's start with the architecture. You see, Harappan cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa themselves were devoid of the grandiose palaces or opulent temples that scream, "Here lives someone important." Instead, we've got uniformity. Buildings constructed with the same baked bricks, houses of similar sizes, and public structures that don't cater to a visible elite. It's like the Harappans collectively agreed, we don't need a McMansion to prove our worth. In a world where keeping up with the Joneses involved more than just a new chariot, this is quite the statement. Sure, there might have been some distinctions. We're not suggesting everyone was singing Cumbare around the Great Bath, but the absence of monumental architecture dedicated to a ruling class hints at a less rigid social order than we see in contemporary cultures. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were practically deities on earth, while in Harappan society, the big boss might have just been the guy who had the last word on what size bricks to use. Now, let's mosey over to the topic of gender roles, where things get even more intriguing. The Harappans might not have been preaching gender equality in the streets, but burial practices suggest a society that didn't play favorites based on chromosomes. Both men and women were buried with similar grave goods, which implies they had comparable roles or status in life. It's not exactly a manifesto for women's rights, but it's a far cry from the patriarchal norms seen elsewhere. Take a moment to consider this. In a world where many ancient societies were busy building patriarchal ladders to nowhere, the Harappans seem to have been quietly dismantling them. The romantic notion of a society where gender roles were shared more evenly is tantalizing, but let's not get too carried away. These were, after all, ancient times, not a utopian commune. But why did the Harappans appear to be more gender-inclusive? Was it a strategic choice, a cultural quirk, or simply a matter of practicality? Perhaps their society recognized that survival and prosperity required every hand on deck, regardless of gender. In a civilization where the wheel of fortune turned on agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship, there was no room for sidelining half the population. However, let's not romanticize this too much. Evidence is scarce, and our interpretations are just that, interpretations. We're peering through a dusty window at a civilization that lived thousands of years ago, and while the view is fascinating, it's also foggy. The idea of gender equality is appealing, especially in a world that often falls short, but reality is rarely so simple. So, what's the takeaway from the Harappan social structure? It's a reminder of the complexity and diversity of human societies. While we might never fully understand the intricacies of Harappan life, what we do know challenges long-held assumptions about ancient civilizations. They were sophisticated, seemingly egalitarian, and perhaps more advanced in social dynamics than many later societies. As we continue to unearth the secrets of the Harappans, we're reminded that history is full of surprises. It's a treasure trove of lessons, revealing that human societies have always been experimenting with different ways of living. The Harappans might not have left us a Rosetta Stone, but their legacy speaks volumes about the possibilities of human organization. Stay tuned as we delve even deeper into their world, exploring the mysteries that linger in the ruins and the whispers of a civilization that defied easy categorization. The Harappans might have left us with more questions than answers, but isn't that the hallmark of any great mystery? We'll keep piecing it together, one brick, one bead, and one burial at a time. As we dig deeper into the enigmatic Harappan civilization, let's address the elephant, or lack of one, in the room, their religious life. You might expect such an advanced society to have grand temples and towering ziggurats, but the Harappans seem to have taken the minimalist route. While their neighbors were busy constructing monuments to appease a pantheon of gods, the Harappans might have been content with a more understated spirituality. It's like comparing a quaint Zen garden to a sprawling cathedral with a stained glass window budget that could bankrupt a small country. The absence of grandiose religious structures in the Indus Valley isn't due to a lack of architectural skill. Remember, these are the folks who engineered cities with drainage systems that could put some modern metropolises to shame. Instead, it suggests a society where religious practices were likely more personal and community-based, rather than centralized around a temple. Maybe the Harappans were onto something, worship without the need for a middleman or extravagant building permits. But what did they worship? Without a Rosetta Stone to decipher their script, we're left piecing together religious practices from artifacts and ruins. Seals and figurines hint at a pantheon that included what might be a proto-Shiva, often depicted in a yoga-like pose. Picture that, an ancient deity already practicing mindfulness while the rest of the world was still figuring out fire and the wheel. Some seals also depict a great mother figure, possibly indicating a reverence for fertility and the earth. It seems the Harappans might have been early adopters of the Mother Nature knows best philosophy. Now, let's pivot to the nitty-gritty of daily life in the Indus Valley. The Harappans weren't just spiritual minimalists, they also had a pragmatic approach to daily living. Their diet was a testament to their agricultural prowess. While they might not have had access to the modern-day wonders of quinoa and kale, they cultivated a variety of crops, including wheat, barley, peas, and sesame. Rice wasn't a staple yet, but they weren't exactly starving in their meticulously planned cities. Their diet was supplemented by the livestock they raised, including cattle, sheep, and goats. However, don't picture a sprawling ranch. Think more along the lines of a community farm that fed the neighborhood. The Harappans also had access to fish and game, thanks to the rivers and land teeming with wildlife. It's a bit like having a farmer's market in your backyard, minus the artisanal cheese vendor and exorbitant prices. As for their clothing, the Harappans were no strangers to style. They made use of locally grown cotton, a luxury that many ancient civilizations didn't have. Imagine the envy of the wool-wearing Egyptians sweltering under the sun. Harappan textiles likely included simple garments, suitable for the climate, with some adorned with intricate patterns. Jewelry, crafted from beads and precious stones like carnelian and lapis lazuli, was another way they expressed their flair. Forget minimalism here. When it came to accessories, more was more. Aside from farming and fashion, Harappans also knew how to have a good time. Artifacts like dice suggest they enjoyed games, and given the absence of Netflix, board games were probably a popular evening pastime. Some scholars even suggest they practiced a form of yoga, evidenced by figurines in meditative poses. It's as if the Harappans were creating their own wellness retreats long before the modern world caught on. But let's not romanticize their daily life too much. While they might have been indulging in some ancient version of mindfulness, they also faced the harsh realities of life in a pre-modern world. Disease, natural disasters, and the sheer unpredictability of agrarian life would have been constant challenges. Like any society, they had their share of struggles, but the evidence suggests they faced them with resilience and adaptability. In exploring the Harappan civilization, we're constantly reminded of their complexity and sophistication. Their understated religious practices and pragmatic approach to daily life paint a picture of a society that was both advanced and grounded. While we may never fully unearth all their secrets, what we do know challenges our perceptions of ancient civilizations. The Harappans offer a tantalizing glimpse into a world where spirituality was personal, daily life was practical, and human ingenuity knew no bounds. As we leave behind the bustling streets and quiet spiritual corners of Harappa, our journey into their world is far from over. There's still more to uncover about this enigmatic civilization. So stay tuned as we continue to unearth the layers of history, one artifact at a time. The Harappans might have left us with more questions than answers, but isn't that the hallmark of all great mysteries? We'll keep piecing it together, one clue and one story at a time. So here we are, standing at the edge of the Harappan timeline, peering into the abyss of their mysterious decline. You might think of them as the ancient world's version of a rock band that split just before they hit the big time. Theories abound, from climate catastrophe to tectonic tantrums, each vying for the title of most likely to have ended a civilization. First up, let's talk climate change, not the modern variety, where we argue over carbon footprints while sipping overpriced lattes. No, we're talking about a mega monsoon failure. Around 1800 BCE, the climate in the Indus Valley started throwing a tantrum worthy of a toddler in the cereal aisle. Rainfall patterns shifted, rivers like the Gagahakra dried up, and the Harappans found themselves in a world where the water cooler was permanently on the fritz. Imagine managing a city without water. It's like trying to run a marathon with a broken leg. But wait, there's more. Enter tectonic shifts, stage left. The Indian plate colliding with the Eurasian plate is the geological equivalent of a slow-motion car crash that never ends. Some scientists propose that these tectonic shenanigans caused earthquakes that altered river courses, diverting precious water away from Harappan cities. It's as if Mother Nature decided to play a cruel game of musical chairs, and the Harappans were left standing. Now, let's not forget the human factor. As with any good mystery, sometimes the butler did it, or in this case, internal social upheaval might have played a role. The Harappans, with their complex trade networks and urban centers, could have faced internal conflicts, resource scarcity, or even a shift in trade routes. It's a bit like watching a high-stakes poker game where everyone folds at once, leaving the dealer scratching their head. And then there's the idea that they simply packed up and moved. Yes, you heard it right. Some scholars suggest that rather than dramatic collapse, the Harappans gradually migrated eastward toward the Ganges basin, adapting to new environments and spreading their cultural influence. It's like the ancient equivalent of a family road trip, sans the minivan and fast food stops. So, what can we, the modern inhabitants of this blue marble, learn from the Harappans' rise and fall? For starters, their story serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of human societies in the face of environmental change. If you think climate change is a modern dilemma, think again. The Harappans remind us that the planet's whims have long dictated the fates of civilizations. It's a bit humbling when you realize that our fancy gadgets and skyscrapers don't make us immune to nature's unpredictability. Then there's their knack for urban planning. The Harappans were city planners before it was cool, proving that a well-laid-out metropolis is more than just aesthetically pleasing. It's a necessity for a thriving society. Their emphasis on sanitation, with those legendary drains, continues to be relevant today. As we wrestle with urban sprawl and infrastructure woes, perhaps we should channel our inner Harappans and prioritize functionality over flashy facades. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in their social structure, or lack thereof. The Harappans might not have had a pyramid-shaped hierarchy, but they built a civilization that thrived on community and cooperation. It's a reminder that societies can flourish without the grandiose trappings of power and wealth. In an age where inequality is a buzzword, their egalitarian leanings offer a refreshing perspective. And let's not forget that Harappan script, the final piece of the puzzle that remains tantalizingly out of reach. It's a testament to the limits of our understanding and the mysteries that still lie buried in the past. In a world obsessed with certainty and instant answers, the undeciphered script is both a frustration and a gift. It challenges us to keep exploring, keep questioning, and remain humble in the face of history's vast unknowns. As we wrap up our journey through the Harappan civilization, we're left with a tapestry of achievements and enigmas. They were a society that excelled in urban planning, trade, and perhaps even in social equality, all while maintaining a connection to the natural world. Their decline, shrouded in mystery, invites us to ponder the complexities of history and the resilience of human culture. In the end, the Harappans remind us that history isn't just about dates and artifacts. It's a profound narrative of human ingenuity, adaptability, and the enduring quest to find our place in the world. So, the next time you find yourself stuck in traffic, cursing the city planners, or pondering the mysteries of life, spare a thought for the Harappans. They might not have left us a roadmap, but their legacy is a guide to navigating the twists and turns of civilization, one thoughtfully planned street at a time. in the quaint English village of Woolsthorpe, where sheep outnumbered people, and the highlight of local entertainment was watching grass grow. A baby named Isaac Newton was born on January 4, 1643. And boy, did he have a rough start. Born prematurely, he was so tiny that folks in the village probably thought he might just blow away in the next stiff breeze. His father had already passed away 3 months before Isaac decided to make his entrance. So from day one, life handed him lemons, and he didn't even have the recipe for lemonade yet. Newton's early years wouldn't make for an inspiring Hallmark movie, that's for sure. His mother, Hannah Icecoff Newton, remarried when Isaac was just 3, leaving him with his grandmother, while she trotted off to start a new family with Reverend Barnabas Smith. Isaac wasn't exactly thrilled with this arrangement, and it sparked a lifelong resentment towards stepfathers and possibly clergymen. Who could blame him? A 3-year-old with abandonment issues is a recipe for some serious angst. Fast forward to Newton's school days at the King's School in Grantham, a town so bustling that it had, wait for it, just 3 streets. It was here that Isaac began to show signs of the genius that he would later unleash upon the world. But let's not sugarcoat it. Young Isaac was awkward, to put it mildly. He wasn't the kid you'd pick first for your dodgeball team, probably because he was too busy contemplating why the ball came back down after you threw it up. Newton had a penchant for tinkering. While other kids were out there playing tag, Newton was building mechanical toys and models, like miniature windmills and water clocks. If Legos had existed back then, you can bet he would have been the kid with the 5,000 piece set, complete with functioning gears and a working trebuchet. While these little projects might seem trivial, they were the building blocks, pun absolutely intended, of his future groundbreaking work in physics. Now, enter stage left. Hannah, Isaac's mom, who thought her son would be better off as a farmer, because obviously the world needed more farmers and fewer theoretical physicists. She yanked him out of school at 17, hoping he would take to the pastoral life like a duck to water. Spoiler alert, he did not. Newton's attempt at farming was as successful as a fish trying to ride a bicycle. He was more interested in the mechanics of water wheels than in actually growing anything. It didn't take long for everyone to realize that the farm wasn't going to be Newton's kingdom. Thankfully, his uncle, William Icecoff, saw potential in the young lad that went beyond ploughing fields and sowing seeds. Isaac was sent back to school, and eventually he made his way to Trinity College, Cambridge. But hold on. Before we catapult into his academic glory days, let's clear up one of the most pervasive myths in history, that infamous apple. You know the story. Newton was napping under a tree. An apple bonked him on the head, and voila, the law of universal gravitation was born. It's a great tale, almost too good, which is exactly why it's mostly hogwash. In reality, Newton did observe an apple fall, but it didn't hit him on the head, and it certainly wasn't the cinematic light bulb moment that led to his gravitational epiphany. According to his own account, the apple prompted him to think about why objects always fall straight down rather than sideways or upwards, which led him into a deep dive about gravity. It was less a moment of eureka, and more a drawn-out process of rigorous thought and experimentation. So, while the apple story makes for a charming allegory, the truth is that Newton's genius came from years of hard work, not a fruit-induced concussion. The real takeaway here is less about Newton being a solitary genius, and more about the fact that he was a relentless thinker who questioned everything, sometimes to the point of madness. His early life was a series of awkward missteps and relentless curiosity, a combination that didn't exactly scream future superstar to most of his contemporaries. Yet, it was this very blend of oddity and brilliance that set the stage for a scientific revolution. So next time you see an apple, take a moment to appreciate the fact that it symbolizes not just gravity, but the perseverance of a man who refused to accept simple answers in a complex world. Ah, the apple, a symbol of Newton's relentless curiosity rather than a cinematic moment of divine inspiration. As we transition from fruity legends to cold, hard academia, let's follow Newton to a place where apples were likely served in pies and not falling from trees, Cambridge University. Picture this. It's 1661, and Newton, at the tender age of 18, walks into Trinity College, Cambridge, not as a high-flying scholar, but as a humble sizar. Now, what's a sizar, you ask? Think of it as a scholarship student with a side gig. In return for financial assistance, Caesars performed chores like cleaning and serving meals for wealthier students. Yes, Newton, who would later redefine physics, started his university life scrubbing floors and waiting tables. Talk about starting from the bottom. Cambridge was the Hogwarts of its day, minus the magic, and plus a lot of Latin. Newton's intellectual journey kicked off under the tutelage of Isaac Barrow, a professor who was more into geometry than Quidditch. Barrow spotted Newton's potential faster than you can say algebra, and he encouraged his bright student to dive into the works of Descartes, Kepler, and Galileo. While most students might have struggled through these dense texts, Newton devoured them like a Netflix binge-watcher on a rainy weekend. But let's not pretend Newton's path was lined with roses. At the time, Cambridge's curriculum was as ancient as the Roman Empire, focused more on Aristotle than the cutting-edge science of the day. Newton, the rebel that he was, went rogue. He spent more time on his own self-directed studies of mathematics and physics than on the prescribed syllabus. This is where we see the first glimmers of his genius. Newton invented calculus in these years, although he called it the method of fluxions, probably because it sounds more impressive in Latin. Enter the Great Plague of 1665, a grim reaper that forced a mass exodus from Cambridge. With the university shut down, Newton retreated to his family home in Woolsthorpe, avoiding both the plague pits and the academic status quo. This period of isolation, while catastrophic for many, was a golden era for Newton. Without the distractions of university life, he turned his home into a one-man science lab. Forget Tiger King and sourdough bread. Newton's quarantine hobbies were a tad more productive. In these 2 years of solitude, Newton laid the groundwork for his theories on calculus, optics, and motion. Imagine a young man, alone in a rural village, using prisms to split light and observe the spectrum. His neighbors probably thought he was dabbling in witchcraft, but Newton was busy proving that white light was composed of all colors. This was revolutionary stuff. People thought light was either a pure entity or just a side effect of divine intervention. Newton's experiments with light and color were as colorful as they were groundbreaking. Now, back to that apple. While the story of the apple whacking Newton on the noggin is more fiction than fact, it was during this period at Woolsthorpe that he pondered the forces that govern the universe. He observed an apple falling from a tree and began questioning why it falls straight down and not sideways or upwards. This line of inquiry led him to the concept of gravitational force, which would later become one of the cornerstones of his law of universal gravitation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Newton wasn't some lone genius working in a vacuum. He was building on the work of giants like Galileo and Kepler, but his relentless questioning and unique insights pushed him further. He was like the Steve Jobs of the 17th century, taking existing ideas and transforming them into something revolutionary. The economic and political context of the time also played a role in shaping Newton's work. England was in a state of flux, with the monarchy restored in 1660 after a brief stint as a republic. The economy was recovering from years of turmoil, and science was becoming a new frontier for innovation and progress. Newton's discoveries were not just about understanding the natural world. They also held potential for technological advancements that could drive economic growth. As Newton returned to Cambridge in 1667, he was no longer the sizar with chores, but a fellow of Trinity College. His work during the plague years had set a foundation that he would build on for the rest of his life. The apple might not have been the magical moment we love to romanticize, but it represents the essence of Newton's genius, a mind that never stopped questioning, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. And so, Newton's story continues, with more discoveries, more challenges, and a few more myths to bust along the way. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of a man whose legacy would transcend his humble beginnings and reshape our understanding of the universe. As Newton settles back into life at Cambridge, no longer a humble sizar, but a fellow of Trinity College, his story takes a turn towards the extraordinary. Think of it as the transition from a promising indie band to a chart-topping sensation. By 1669, Isaac Newton was appointed as the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, a position that, let's be honest, sounds far more prestigious than it probably was at the time. Yet, It was the perfect platform for Newton to launch his groundbreaking ideas into the intellectual stratosphere, into the realm of academic rivalries and intellectual showdowns, with a cast that would make any reality TV producer drool. One of the most notable contenders in this cerebral arena was Robert Hooke. Hooke, a man of many talents and even more insecurities, was the curator of experiments at the Royal Society and an accomplished scientist in his own right. But let's just say he wasn't exactly on Newton's Christmas card list. Tension between these two was akin to a 17th century Twitter feud, minus the hashtags. Hooke had his fingers in many pies, and his ego was about as large as Newton's intellect. Their rivalry was a tale as old as time, or at least as old as academia itself. Two brilliant minds, both vying for the spotlight. They clashed over who had the rightful claim to certain discoveries, most famously the inverse square law of gravitation. Hooke claimed he had the idea first, while Newton, with the confidence of a man who actually did the math, was having none of it. Their correspondence was less about friendly scientific banter and more about volleying thinly veiled insults. It was like watching a chess match, with each move calculated to assert dominance. In the midst of these intellectual skirmishes, Newton embarked on his magnum opus, the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, affectionately known as the Principia. Now, if you're imagining a tranquil scene of Newton scribbling away in solitude, think again. The journey to publish this masterpiece was less a serene stroll and more a treacherous hike through a minefield of academic politics. The political landscape of the time was as volatile as a barrel of gunpowder. The Royal Society, which should have been a beacon of scientific progress, was embroiled in its own dramas. Newton's protector in this tumultuous world was Edmund Halley. Yes, the comet guy. Halley, who had the foresight to recognize Newton's genius, played the role of mentor, advocate, and sometimes therapist. He was instrumental in convincing Newton to publish his work, navigating the murky waters of egos and rivalries like a seasoned diplomat. Halley was so committed that he even funded the publication of the Principia out of his own pocket, a move that was both risky and generous. The cost, about £130, which may not sound like much today, but was a hefty sum back then, equivalent to several years' salary for the average worker. Halley believed in Newton's work so much that he bet the farm on it, metaphorically speaking, of course. It was a testament to the power of intellectual camaraderie, and also a reminder of how far a little financial backing could go in turning the wheels of progress. The Principia was published in 1687, and it was nothing short of a scientific earthquake. Newton's laws of motion, 3 elegant principles that could fit on a cocktail napkin, revolutionized the way we understand the universe. They provided the framework for classical mechanics, a system that would dominate scientific thought for centuries. The laws were as follows. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an external force. The change of motion is proportional to the force applied, and for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Simple, right? Yet these deceptively straightforward statements unlocked the secrets of planetary motion, tides, and even the mundane mechanics of everyday life. But not everyone was ready to jump on the Newtonian bandwagon. While many of his contemporaries were dazzled by his insights, some found his theories as cryptic as a treasure map written in invisible ink. The sheer brilliance of Newton's mind was intimidating, and his often aloof demeanor didn't win him any popularity contests. Newton was a bit like a rock star who refused to do interviews. His work spoke for itself, but the man behind the equations remained an enigma. The publication of the Principia wasn't just a personal triumph for Newton. It was a turning point in scientific thought. It signaled the shift from a world governed by superstition and dogma to one ruled by reason and evidence. Newton's laws laid the groundwork for technological advancements that would propel the economy into new realms of possibility. The Age of Enlightenment was dawning, and Newton was its herald. Yet, with great genius came great complexity. Newton wasn't just a brilliant mind. He was a bundle of contradictions. He was fiercely private and often paranoid, convinced that rivals were out to steal his thunder. His disputes with Hooke were legendary, but they were just the tip of the iceberg. Newton had a penchant for collecting enemies like some people collect stamps. His quarrels with fellow scientists were as much a part of his legacy as his theories. In the grand tapestry of history, Newton's story is a fascinating portrait of human nature. a reminder that even the greatest minds are not immune to jealousy, pride, and the occasional bout of pettiness. His achievements were monumental, but they were achieved in a world rife with challenges, both intellectual and personal. As we draw closer to the later chapters of Newton's life, it's clear that his journey was far from over. The Principia was a milestone, but there were more discoveries to be made, more rivalries to navigate, and more myths to unravel. So stay tuned as we continue to chart the course of a man whose legacy would transcend the centuries, shaping the very fabric of modern science. As Newton's story moves beyond the academic halls and scientific rivalries, we find him donning a rather unexpected hat, that of a government official. It's 1696, and the man who once puzzled over the mysteries of the cosmos has now been appointed warden of the Royal Mint. Yep, Isaac Newton, the lifelong bachelor with zero interest in personal wealth, is suddenly knee-deep in coins and counterfeiting. It's a bit like asking a vegan to run a butcher shop, but hey, stranger things have happened. So why the career switch? Well, it turns out that England's economic situation was as stable as a Jenga tower in a windstorm. Counterfeiting was rampant, and the silver currency was in shambles. Coins were being clipped, literally. People would shave off tiny pieces of silver from the edges of coins, melt them down, and sell the metal. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a full-blown economic crisis, threatening to derail the country's trade and finances. Enter Newton, the man with a knack for problem-solving and a reputation for relentless determination. Newton's appointment was more than just a cushy government gig. It was a national service, a call to arms in the battle against counterfeiters who were wreaking havoc on the economy. And let's be honest, if anyone could figure out a way to catch these crafty criminals, it was the guy who cracked the code of the universe. Newton took to the task with the same intensity he once reserved for scientific inquiry. He wasn't just there to warm a seat, he was there to clean house. His first order of business was to overhaul the entire currency system, a task that makes cleaning out your garage look like a walk in the park. Newton masterminded the Great Recoinage of 1696, a massive undertaking that involved recalling all the old, worn-out coins and replacing them with new ones. The scale of this operation was staggering. An estimated 7 million pounds of silver was melted down and recast into new coins. And if you're wondering, that's about 500 metric tons of metal. The logistics were mind-boggling, involving mints across the country and a workforce that could rival a small army. But Newton didn't just stop at reminting coins. He became a veritable Sherlock Holmes of the mint, tracking down counterfeiters like a bloodhound on a scent. He even went undercover in taverns and grubby back alleys, gathering intelligence and building cases against the culprits. It was said that Newton personally interrogated more than 100 suspects, a feat that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. His methods were meticulous, akin to a scientific experiment, collecting evidence and compiling detailed reports that would stand up in court. One of his most famous adversaries was William Challoner, a notorious counterfeiter who had been thumbing his nose at the law for years. Challoner was a slippery character, a master of deception who had managed to evade capture through a combination of bribery and sheer audacity. But he hadn't reckoned with Newton's tenacity. After a relentless investigation, Newton managed to gather enough evidence to bring Challoner to trial. The counterfeiter was convicted and sent to the gallows in 1699, a stern warning to others who might attempt similar crimes. Newton's work at the Mint wasn't just about catching crooks. It had a profound impact on the economy. By stabilizing the currency, he helped restore confidence in the English monetary system, paving the way for increased trade and economic growth. His reforms laid the groundwork for a more modern and reliable banking system, which in turn supported the burgeoning industrial revolution. It's a prime example of how scientific precision and relentless curiosity can solve even the most practical problems. Ironically, while Newton was busy reshaping the financial landscape of England, his own relationship with money remained as detached as ever. Despite his high-paying position, Newton lived modestly, more interested in his intellectual pursuits than in material wealth. He was the Scrooge McDuck of his day, swimming through piles of silver coins, but with none of the avarice. It's one of history's little quirks, this collision of genius and fiscal responsibility. Yet, For all his success at the Mint, Newton's tenure there reveals a more human side to his character. Gone was the aloof academic, replaced by a man of action, a detective in pursuit of justice. It was a role that required not just intellect, but also grit and determination. Newton proved that his genius wasn't confined to the theoretical realms. It was equally effective in the real world, where tangible solutions were desperately needed. As we look at Newton's time at the Royal Mint, it's clear that his legacy extended beyond the laws of motion and the Principia. He was a man who could adapt and apply his talents to whatever challenge came his way. His work wasn't just about catching counterfeiters or minting coins. It was about stabilizing a nation in a time of need, showcasing the power of reason and evidence in solving practical problems. But don't think for a moment that Newton's story ends here. There are still more chapters to explore, more myths to bust, and more insights to uncover. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of a man whose contributions continue to resonate through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of curiosity and intellect in shaping the world. Now, let's dive into the twilight years of Isaac Newton, a time when his intellect took a rather peculiar turn. Imagine the man who once decoded the universe, now elbow-deep in alchemy and biblical prophecy, fields more associated with Harry Potter than hard science. But before you roll your eyes at Newton's late-life pursuits, remember, this was the 17th century, an era when the lines between science and mysticism were blurrier than a foggy London morning. Newton's fascination with alchemy wasn't the dabbling of a mad scientist throwing ingredients into a cauldron, cackling maniacally. It was an earnest quest for the philosopher's stone, the mythical substance said to turn base metals into gold and grant eternal life. In this, Newton wasn't alone. Many of the era's greatest minds believed alchemy was the key to unlocking nature's deepest secrets. A modern perspective might dismiss it as pseudoscience, but in Newton's day, it was cutting-edge research. He filled hundreds of pages with cryptic notes and coded recipes, a testament to his belief that alchemy held the key to understanding the universe's hidden mechanics. His work was so secretive and complex that historians are still deciphering it, akin to cracking an ancient code. So, while Newton's alchemical pursuits might seem like a detour into the bizarre, they reflect the period's intellectual climate. It was a time when the mystical and the empirical were two sides of the same coin. Speaking of coins, Newton's interest in alchemy did have a practical side. The Royal Mint's top detective was keenly aware of gold's economic power. Transforming lead into gold wasn't just an abstract dream. It was an economic game-changer. Imagine the implications for a nation whose wealth depended on precious metals. Newton's alchemy wasn't just an eccentric hobby. It was an extension of his lifelong quest for understanding and innovation. Yet, alchemy wasn't Newton's only late-life obsession. He also turned his formidable intellect towards biblical prophecy. He spent years poring over religious texts, attempting to decode the Bible's hidden meanings. Newton wrote extensively about the end times, believing that careful analysis of biblical prophecies could reveal the world's fate. In this, he wasn't seeking spiritual enlightenment, but rather a master plan, a divine blueprint that governed existence. Now, you might wonder why a man of science would delve into the mystical. But consider this. Newton's era was steeped in religious thought, and the church wielded immense influence. To Newton, the Bible was another puzzle to be solved, another piece in the cosmic jigsaw. His religious inquiries were driven by the same relentless curiosity that fueled his scientific achievements. He saw no conflict between science and faith. For Newton, they were intertwined paths to truth. Newton's later years also saw the emergence of myths and legends that would shape his legacy, often casting him as a solitary genius touched by divine inspiration. Yet, the reality was far more complex. Newton was a product of his time, a man whose achievements were built on the foundations laid by others. He stood on the shoulders of giants like Kepler and Galileo, and his success was as much about persistence and intellect as it was about collaboration. In assessing Newton's legacy, it's crucial to separate the man from the myth. He wasn't an infallible genius, but a brilliant, flawed human being. He could be vindictive, paranoid, and fiercely competitive. His feuds with contemporaries like Robert Hooke and Leibniz were legendary, characterized by a pettiness that belied his intellectual stature. Newton's disputes were less about scientific rigor and more about personal vendettas. a reminder that even the greatest minds can be consumed by ego and rivalry. Yet, for all his foibles, Newton's contributions to science and society are undeniable. His laws of motion and universal gravitation revolutionized our understanding of the physical world, laying the groundwork for centuries of scientific advancement. His work at the Royal Mint stabilized England's economy, showcasing the practical applications of his genius. Newton's legacy transcends his flaws, a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity. So, how would Newton fit into today's world of science and innovation? Picture him at the helm of a tech startup, or perhaps as a lead researcher at a cutting-edge lab. His relentless curiosity and problem-solving skills would make him a formidable force in any field. Newton would likely thrive in an era that values innovation and interdisciplinary collaboration, where the boundaries between science and technology are constantly shifting. In today's world, Newton's alchemical experiments might find a home in the realm of materials science or nanotechnology. His biblical studies could translate into data analysis or cryptography. Newton's genius lay not just in his scientific achievements, but in his ability to see connections where others saw none. His mind was a crucible of ideas, constantly churning out new theories and possibilities. As we wrap up this exploration of Isaac Newton's life and legacy, it's clear that he was more than just a historical figure. He was a pioneer, a provocateur, and a paradox. Newton's life was a testament to the power of curiosity and intellect, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey, not a destination. His story continues to inspire, challenging us to question, explore, and innovate. In the end, Newton's legacy is not just about the laws of motion or the Principia. It's about the spirit of inquiry that drives us to understand the world and our place in it. Newton's life was a tapestry of triumphs and trials, a fascinating portrait of human nature in all its complexity. His story is a reminder that even the greatest minds are shaped by their time, and that genius is as much about perseverance as it is about inspiration. As you drift off with these thoughts in mind, remember that the next time you see an apple, it's not just a fruit. It's a symbol of a man's relentless quest to understand the universe, a testament to the power of a curious mind to change the world. And that, dear listener, is a legacy worth celebrating. In the bustling hub of 5th century BCE Athens, where democracy was being invented and philosophers were busy turning navel-gazing into an art form, the lives of women were about as exciting as a pot of day-old lentil stew. While their male counterparts were strutting around the agora, debating the finer points of justice and civic duty, women were largely confined to the oikos, or household, a term that sounds cozy, but was often more akin to a gilded cage. Picture a society where the closest thing to a girl's night out was a trip to the well for water. This was the reality for Athenian women. Now, before you start imagining these women as passive prisoners in their own homes, let's unpack what life in the oikos entailed. These women were the CEOs of domestic affairs, responsible for managing the household, which included everything from supervising slaves to weaving textiles, the ancient equivalent of owning a startup, but without the perks of a modern-day tech conference. They spun wool, baked bread, and raised children, all while maintaining the household's finances. Yet, despite their substantial contributions, their social status was, let's say, less than stellar. Public life in Athens was a man's playground, and women were very much on the outside looking in. Men spent their days engaging in politics, philosophy, and warfare, while women were expected to uphold the sanctity of the home. It was as if a velvet rope separated the sexes, with men enjoying front-row seats to public life, and women standing in the back, quietly applauding their efforts. And if you think Athenian women might have found solace in the arts or literature, think again. Education was about as accessible to them as a modern-day password reset email that never arrives. The disparity was stark. Men were the face of the city-state, the movers and shakers, while women were the silent partners, ensuring the home front was secure. Athenian society valued a woman's chastity and domesticity over her intellect or individuality, a notion as backward as using a clay tablet to check your morning emails. And while we might romanticize the idea of classical Greece as a cradle of civilization, it was also a stage for some spectacular gender inequities. To put it in perspective, imagine being a woman in Athens and seeing your husband trot off to the agora, where he could vote, socialize, and engage in philosophical debates. Meanwhile, your daily highlight might be a particularly fluffy loaf of bread. This wasn't just a matter of missing out on witty repartee. It was a systemic sidelining from economic and political life. Women couldn't own property or vote, and they certainly weren't popping into the assembly to share their views on Socratic irony. Despite this, the household was a microcosm of Athenian society, and women played a critical role in sustaining it. Their work was crucial, yet undervalued, much like an unsung hero in a buddy cop movie. They were the behind-the-scenes powerhouses, ensuring everything ran smoothly while the men took center stage. And while men were out discussing the virtues of courage and wisdom, women were busy embodying those very traits through resilience and resourcefulness. To further drive home the contrast, consider the symposium, a social institution for Athenian men. It was a gathering that combined wine, philosophical discussion, and entertainment, much like a TED talk with a generous open bar. Women, unless they were courtesans or entertainers, were conspicuously absent from these intellectual bacchanals. Instead, their evenings were spent in domestic tranquility, which probably felt less like tranquility and more like solitary confinement with chores. Yet, even within the confines of the oikos, there were ways in which women exerted influence. Through managing the household and raising the next generation of citizens, women were the unacknowledged architects of Athenian society. They were the ones who passed on cultural values and traditions, keeping the societal engine running smoothly. But their contributions were often overshadowed by the larger-than-life exploits of their male counterparts, who were busy carving their names into history, sometimes literally, on those marble columns. In essence, the role of women in ancient Athens was a study in contrast. They were simultaneously vital and invisible, powerful within their domain, but powerless beyond it. Their lives were a series of paradoxes, much like the city-state they inhabited, a land of great thinkers and greater inequalities. While men were busy drafting the blueprint for Western civilization, women were making sure the foundation didn't crumble beneath it. As we continue to unravel the lives of Athenian women, it's essential to remember that history is a tapestry woven from both the celebrated and the silenced. And while the spotlight may have shone brightly on the feats of Athenian men, the women, quietly resilient, were the threads holding it all together. So, next time you think of ancient Athens, don't just envision the marble statues and olive wreaths. Remember the women, behind the columns, who played their part in shaping a world that so often forgot to return the favor. While men were off drafting the blueprint for Western civilization, the women of Athens were left with another kind of draft, the marriage contract. If you thought modern prenups were a buzzkill, buckle up for Athenian marital economics, where love was often as transactional as a farmer's market on a Saturday. Let's start with the dowry, the financial linchpin of Athenian matrimony. Picture this. A woman's family hands over a hefty sum or property to the groom to ensure she doesn't become a financial drain. Think of it as a reverse insurance policy. Pay now to guarantee your daughter won't be eating ramen in her old age. In today's numbers, that dowry could range from a few hundred to several thousand drachmas, depending on the family's wealth. Considering a skilled worker earned about a drachma a day, this was no pocket change. A well-endowed dowry was like having a financial passport, ensuring a smoother passage through married life. But here's the kicker. The bride had zero control over this dowry. It was managed by her husband as long as the marriage lasted. If things went south and the marriage ended, the dowry was supposed to be returned to the bride's family. In theory, that is. In reality, trying to reclaim a dowry was like trying to get a refund without a receipt. Good luck with that. Marriage contracts in Athens were as locked down as a vault, outlining everything from the dowry to the groom's obligations. These contracts were the ancient equivalent of signing on the dotted line at a car dealership. But instead of haggling over horsepower, you were negotiating your future stability. And just like a good lawyer today would tell you to read the fine print, Athenian women had to trust that their fathers and husbands had their best interests at heart. Spoiler alert. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Now, if you're wondering what happened to the bride's personal property, here's the plot twist. She had very little personal property to begin with. Women couldn't own land, and any possessions they might have, like jewelry, were often part of the dowry. It was a bit like being given a company car with the caveat that you can't actually drive it. Thanks, but no thanks. Even in the rare instances where a woman inherited property, it was typically managed by a male guardian, usually a relative. The reasoning was as condescending as it sounds. Women were considered incapable of handling financial matters. It's a bit like entrusting your toddler with your 401k. It's not happening. This lack of control left women economically dependent on their husbands, fathers, or sons. The result? A cycle of dependency that was as hard to break as a bad Wi-Fi connection. In this patriarchal pinball machine, women bounced from father to husband, and if widowed, back to son or brother. They were players in a game where the rules were written in a language they weren't taught to read. And while men were busy stockpiling wealth and influence, women had to make do with their social currency, which was about as valuable as monopoly money. Yet, despite the limitations, women found ways to exert some influence. They could negotiate the terms of their dowry, or more precisely, their families could. The dowry acted as a safety net, a financial cushion that, in some cases, could provide a measure of security and leverage during marriage negotiations. It's like having a secret weapon in a game where the odds are stacked against you. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the idea of Athenian women as passive victims. Sure, they weren't exactly storming the Phoenix with demands for equal rights, but within the confines of their roles, they were as shrewd as any politician. They managed households, influenced family affairs, and even played strategic roles in marriage alliances. They were the unsung strategists of their time, maneuvering within a system designed to keep them sidelined. The economic realities faced by Athenian women were a series of paradoxes. They were pivotal to the family economy, but excluded from the broader economic life of the city. They were the backbone of the oikos, yet invisible in the public square. It's a bit like being the engine of a car, but never getting to take it for a spin. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Athenian women's lives, it's clear that their story is one of resilience and ingenuity. They were bound by societal norms, yet found ways to stretch those binds, revealing the complex dance between agency and constraint. The economic aspect of their lives may have been a rock and a hard place, but they navigated it with a tenacity that deserves recognition. Stay tuned as we continue to explore this fascinating historical landscape, where women played a critical yet often overlooked role in shaping the ancient world. The story of Athenian women, with its twists and turns, is far from over, just like the intrigue of Athens itself. Now, let's dive into the societal expectations and legal restrictions that made an Athenian woman's life in the 5th century BCE less of a walk in the park and more of a marathon with obstacles. First things first, citizenship. In Athens, being a citizen was the golden ticket to the chocolate factory of rights and privileges. And guess what? Women didn't have one. Athenian citizenship was as exclusive as a VIP club. Women were perpetually stuck outside the velvet rope, peering in with their non-member passes. Only men could strut into the assembly and cast votes, while women had about as much political sway as a garden gnome. To qualify as a citizen, you needed to be male, born to citizen parents, and registered in your father's deme, an administrative unit that was part of the ancient Greek equivalent of the DMV, but with more democracy and fewer license renewals. Women, on the other hand, were considered perpetual minors under the guardianship of a man. Their legal rights were as thin as a philosopher's patience and could be summed up in a few bleak lines. They couldn't own property, vote, or represent themselves in court. If you think modern bureaucracy is a nightmare, imagine having to ask your brother to file a complaint about your stolen sandals. And speaking of sandals, let's tread into the territory of legal rights, or the glaring lack thereof. In the courtroom, women were represented by male relatives. It's as if the legal system was a game of telephone, where your grievances were filtered through the voice of a man who may or may not have been invested in your cause. If a woman needed to go to court, it was like attending a concert and finding out you have to give your ticket to someone else. She was the ultimate silent partner in any legal proceedings. Now, on to the philosophical musings of Athens' most famous thinkers. You might think that the intellectual heavyweights of the time would champion gender equality, but alas, it was more like a philosophical boys' club. Enter Aristotle, the ancient influencer with opinions about women that were as flattering as a funhouse mirror. Aristotle believed women were biologically inferior to men. He actually said that women were deformed males. Ouch, Aristotle. That's not exactly the kind of motivational quote you'd hang on your wall. Aristotle's thoughts on women were about as progressive as a chariot race in reverse. He argued that women were incapable of rational thought and should be relegated to the domestic sphere. In his Politics, he stated that the male is by nature superior, and the female inferior, the one rules, and the other is ruled. It was like he'd never met the savvy women who ran households with the efficiency of a well-oiled war machine. But hey, he was also convinced that the brain was an organ for cooling the blood, so maybe we should take his anatomical insights with a grain of salt. Even Plato, who in The Republic flirted with the idea of gender equality, ultimately relegated women to a secondary status. He suggested that women could be guardians, but only as a backup singer to the male lead. For a society so obsessed with balance and harmony, Athens had a curious way of ignoring the disharmony in its treatment of women. The philosophers of the time might have been busy contemplating the ideal state, but their vision of equality was more abstract than a Picasso painting. Now, let's talk about the myths versus the harsh realities of Athenian democracy. We often think of Athens as the cradle of democracy, where every citizen had a voice. But remember, citizen was a term more exclusive than a secret menu item at your favorite coffee shop. The democracy that Athens boasted about was a democracy for men, by men. Women, slaves, and medics, foreigners living in Athens, were excluded from the decision-making process. It was like throwing a party and only inviting the people who agreed with you. To put it in perspective, the Athenian assembly, where all the major decisions were made, was attended by up to 6,000 citizens at a time. But for women, entering the assembly was as likely as a snowstorm in the Aegean. The romanticized image of Athens as a bastion of freedom and equality crumbles under the scrutiny of these exclusionary practices. It's a reminder that the stories we tell about history can be as carefully curated as an Instagram feed, showing only the highlights and airbrushing the inequalities. In a society where women were seen as perpetual minors and had to rely on male guardians for legal representation, it's no wonder their contributions were overshadowed. But let's not forget that within these confines, women were strategists and diplomats in their own right, navigating a world that often dismissed their agency. They were the unsung heroines of their time, pulling the strings behind the curtain while men took a bow on stage. As we continue this journey through the lives of Athenian women, keep in mind that history is a stage filled with both the celebrated and the overlooked. Behind every marble column and philosophical treatise, there were women whose stories deserve to be told. Stay tuned as we further explore the complex tapestry of ancient Athens, where the reality often contradicts the legend, and the truth can be as elusive as the Minotaur in his labyrinth. While the average Athenian woman's life was a well-rehearsed performance of domesticity and dependence, a few managed to snag themselves roles that would make any playwright jealous. Enter the priestesses and the Hetaerae, women who danced to the beat of their own lyre, wielding influence in a city where their gender typically meant they were more seen than heard. Let's start with the priestesses, those rare women who climbed the societal ladder not by marriage, but by divine appointment. These ladies wore their piety like a badge of honor and had a front-row seat to the spiritual goings-on of Athens. They served gods and goddesses like Athena, Demeter, and Hera, and while they didn't have the political clout of their male counterparts, they held a kind of sacred sway. Think of them as the celebrity influencers of the religious world, with the power to bless or curse crops, marriages, and festivals. Take the priestess of Athena Polias, for example. She was the custodian of the goddess's statue and played a starring role in the Panathenaic festival, a grand procession complete with sacrifices and athletic competitions. Her influence was such that being part of her family was akin to having backstage passes to the most exclusive event in Athens. This wasn't just a role, it was a career with perks, like participating in state functions and ceremonies. These priestesses may not have been crafting policy, but they were shaping the spiritual narrative of the city. And in a place where religion and politics were as intertwined as a double helix, that was no small feat. But not every woman was content to stay within the temple walls. Some, like the Hetaerae, carved out niches in the more secular spheres of influence. Hetairai were a far cry from the average Athenian housewife. They were trained in the arts, educated, and often more worldly than their male patrons. They were the sophisticates of the social circuit, more akin to Renaissance courtesans than mere companions. While women were generally excluded from symposia, that bastion of male bonding, Hetairai were the exception. They mingled in these intellectual salons, not just as entertainment, but as participants in the discussions, which was more than could be said for most Athenian men's wives. One of the most famous Hetairai was Aspasia of Miletus, who was not only the companion of Pericles, one of Athens' most celebrated leaders, but also a thinker in her own right. Aspasia reportedly had the ear of Socrates and was known for her wit and wisdom, a testament to her influence in a society where women were typically expected to remain silent. Her salon was a hub of philosophical discourse, and she was said to have contributed to Pericles' speeches, which, if true, makes her a ghostwriter of sorts for one of the most famous orators in Greek history. So, what gave these women their edge? Education and independence. While the typical Athenian woman might be weaving tales of domesticity, the Hetairai were weaving stories of philosophy and politics. They were financially independent, often managing their own affairs, and in some cases, accumulating wealth that would make a dowry look like pocket change. This independence, combined with their education, gave them a unique position in Athenian society, one that allowed them to move through social circles that were otherwise off-limits to women. Yet, let's not get carried away romanticizing this as a feminist utopia. The Hetairai, much like the priestesses, were exceptions to the rule. Their status and influence were contingent on their ability to navigate a society that still fundamentally viewed women as secondary. The freedom they enjoyed was not the precursor to a broader movement for women's rights, but rather a rare anomaly in an otherwise patriarchal framework. The juxtaposition between these women and their more conventional counterparts highlights the stark realities of gender in ancient Athens. While a select few could exert influence in religious or intellectual spheres, the majority were relegated to the shadows of their own homes. If the priestesses and Hetairai were the exception, the rule was a life of domestic servitude, economic dependence, and social invisibility. Yet, even within these constraints, Athenian women found ways to exert subtle influence. The domestic sphere, though limited, was still a realm of power. Women managed the household finances, raised future citizens, and maintained family alliances. Their work, though undervalued, was crucial to the functioning of the city-state. It was a kind of quiet power, one that didn't make headlines, but was the bedrock upon which Athenian society was built. So, while the priestesses and Hetairai were outliers, their existence was a testament to the resilience and adaptability of women in ancient Athens. They remind us that even in the most restrictive environments, women found ways to break the mold, bend the rules, and carve out spaces for themselves in a world that often sought to deny them a voice. As we continue to unravel the lives of Athenian women, it's essential to appreciate both the exceptions and the rule. The priestesses and Hetairai may have been the visible few, but the invisible many were no less important. They were the unsung heroines of their time, quietly shaping the world from behind the scenes. And while the spotlight of history may have shone on the men of Athens, the women were the ones holding it up, ensuring it never flickered out. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this historical tapestry, exploring the lives and legacies of these remarkable women, and uncovering more stories that challenge the myths and reveal the realities of ancient Athens. There's still much to unravel, and the next chapter promises to be as captivating as the last. The labyrinth of Athenian women's lives, much like the Minotaur's maze, was filled with twists and turns that defy easy explanation. As we unravel this historical tapestry, we see a pattern of paradoxes. Women in ancient Athens were both the bedrock of the household and the invisible hands behind the curtain of public life. While the spotlight shone on the grand stages of politics and philosophy, the real drama often unfolded in the domestic sphere, where women navigated a world of constraints with a resilience that would make even the stoic Socrates nod in approval. Let's take a moment to consider the mundane yet monumental tasks that filled the lives of typical Athenian women. In a society where weaving wasn't just a hobby but a necessity, women were the original spin doctors, quite literally. The production of textiles was a cornerstone of the Athenian economy, and women were at the helm, spinning and weaving with a dexterity that rivaled any artisan. Their work clothed their families and contributed to the wealth of the household, but it was largely unrecognized in the annals of economic history. It's a bit like being the unsung hero of a heist movie, the mastermind behind the scenes, plotting the course while others took the glory. And then there was the financial acumen required to manage a household. Women were responsible for budgeting and allocating resources, skills that would make any modern financial planner proud. They had to stretch a drachma as far as it could go, ensuring the household ran smoothly. However, despite their economic prowess, their financial independence was as elusive as a mirage. Women couldn't own property outright or engage in trade, so their influence was circumscribed by the legal framework of the day. Imagine being a chef who can cook a feast but isn't allowed to taste it. Frustrating, to say the least. Now, let's pivot to the standout figures like Aspasia or the priestesses, whose exceptional roles contrast sharply with the everyday lives of their peers. These women defied the conventions of their time, carving out spaces where they wielded influence, whether through the art of conversation or the rituals of religion. Their stories are the stuff of legends, but they also highlight the severe limitations placed on women in general. These outliers remind us that gender roles in ancient Athens were as rigid as they were arbitrary, constraining the potential of countless women who were never given the chance to step into the spotlight. So, how does this ancient tale resonate with our modern world? Well, the echoes of Athens can still be heard in today's gender discussions, where debates over equality and opportunity are as vibrant as ever. The challenges faced by Athenian women, economic dependency, social invisibility, and restricted agency, mirror struggles that persist in various forms today. Despite millennia of progress, the conversation around gender roles remains a hot topic, proving that while the players and stage might change, the script often sounds eerily familiar. But let's not end on a cynical note. Humanity, though slow to change, does evolve. Today, women have made significant strides, entering spheres previously denied to them and challenging the status quo with a tenacity that would make the fierce women of Athens proud. If history teaches us anything, it's that change is both inevitable and hard-won. The legacy of Athenian women, with their quiet resilience and strategic ingenuity, serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring strength of those who refuse to be sidelined. As we wrap up this journey through the lives of women in ancient Athens, let's acknowledge both the progress made and the road still ahead. It's a complex tapestry indeed, but one woven with threads of hope and determination. So next time you find yourself contemplating gender roles in the modern world, remember the women of Athens who played their parts with grace and grit. They may have been confined by their era, but their stories transcend time, whispering through the ages with a message that is both timeless and timely. The struggle for equality is never in vain, and every thread counts in the fabric of history. And with that, we've reached the end of our ancient Odyssey, a tale of paradox and progress that continues to unfold. The women of Athens may have lived millennia ago, but their legacy lives on, a testament to the enduring human spirit and the power of those who, against all odds, find a way to shine. It's a fine morning in 626 AD China, and all is not well at the imperial palace. The air is thick with tension, and somewhere in this swirling mix of dread and ambition stands Lai Shimin, a man with designs on the throne that would make a Game of Thrones plot look like a friendly game of checkers. But don't let the drama fool you. This is the kind of chaos that sets the stage for the rise of one of the Tang Dynasty's most consequential emperors, Taizong. To set the scene, let's backtrack a bit to the collapse of the Sui dynasty. The Sui, bless their short-lived reign, were around for a grand total of 37 years before they imploded. Think of them as a historical shooting star, brief and utterly disastrous. By the end, the empire was so tangled in its own bureaucracy and failed military campaigns that it practically handed over the reins to the Tang dynasty like a hot potato. Enter Lai Shimin. Born in 598 AD, he wasn't exactly destined for greatness from the get-go. He was the second son of Lai Yuan, a former Sui official who looked at the crumbling empire and thought, I can do better than this. And so he did. With a little help from his sons, Lai Yuan established the Tang dynasty in 618 AD and took the throne as Emperor Geazu. It was a family business, you see, with Lai Shimin as the ambitious middle manager eyeing a corner office with an excellent view. Now, Lai Shimin wasn't just brawn and no brains. He had both in ample supply. At the tender age of 18, he took charge of military campaigns that helped secure his father's control over China, proving he was more than just another princeling with a fancy title. He was a battlefield prodigy, a charismatic leader, and crucially, someone who understood the value of a good power play. But let's not sugarcoat it. The path to the top was as cutthroat as it gets. Fast forward to the infamous Xuanwu Gate incident in 626 AD, the medieval equivalent of a corporate merger gone horribly wrong, where merger means getting rid of your brothers. Lai Shimin, realizing that his elder brother, Crown Prince Lai Jiansheng, and younger brother Lai Yuanji were plotting against him, decided to take matters into his own hands. And by hands, I mean a well-planned ambush. On July 2nd, 626 AD, Lai Shimin invited his brothers to meet at Xuanwu Gate, the north gate of the palace. Sounds like a peaceful family gathering, right? Wrong. It was a trap worthy of a Machiavellian masterpiece. In a swift and brutal encounter, Lai Shimin's forces eliminated his brothers, securing his own claim to the throne. Talk about sibling rivalry. Shakespeare would have had a field day with this one. The aftermath of the Xuanwu Gate incident was both predictable and shocking. Predictable in the sense that, with his brothers out of the picture, Lai Shimin became the de facto power in the empire. Shocking in the sheer audacity and cold-blooded efficiency of it all. He didn't just step over his brothers' ambitions, he practically vaulted over them. 3 days later, Emperor Geazu, recognizing which way the political winds were blowing, abdicated in favor of his son. Lai Shimin ascended the throne as Emperor Taizong, and thus began a reign that would be marked by reform, expansion, and surprisingly, a bit of introspection. But more on that later. For now, suffice it to say that the Tang Dynasty had found its man, and he wasn't going to let a little thing like fratricide get in the way of his vision for China. And what a vision it was. Under Taizong, the Tang Dynasty would flourish, becoming one of the most powerful and culturally vibrant periods in Chinese history. But the road to greatness wasn't paved with gold, more like the blood and sweat of those who underestimated Lai Shimin. From the ashes of the Sui, the Tang Dynasty rose, and at its helm was a man who understood that sometimes ruthless pragmatism was just what the empire needed. And so, with the throne now firmly beneath his feet, and a rather awkward family reunion behind him, Emperor Taizong set his sights on transforming the Tang Dynasty from a blood-soaked rise to power into a golden age of governance. He had a vision, and no, it wasn't just about keeping his head attached to his shoulders. Taizong wanted a stable, prosperous empire. Think of him as the ultimate empire-building video gamer, but with far more at stake than just a high score. Taizong's first order of business, economic reform. And let's be honest, nothing says, I care about the people, quite like reducing taxes. It's the age-old political play. Cut the fiscal burden and watch your popularity soar. Taizong slashed taxes to a mere 10% of the harvest, a move that must have felt like finding a surprise bonus in your wallet. For peasants who'd been squeezed dry by previous regimes, this was the kind of news that made you want to tattoo Taizong's face on your arm. But reducing taxes was just the tip of the iceberg. Taizong introduced the equal field system, a policy that sounds about as thrilling as watching paint dry, but was revolutionary in its impact. Here's the deal. The government allocated land based on the ability to cultivate it, ensuring even the humblest farmer got a slice of the pie. It was a bit like operas. You get a car, moment, except with land. The idea was to prevent the kind of land hoarding that had plagued the Sui dynasty, like an agricultural monopoly game gone wrong. Now, you might be thinking, why didn't everyone do this? Well, it turns out that getting the rich to share land is about as easy as getting a cat to take a bath. But Taizong knew his empire's strength lay in its agricultural backbone, and by redistributing land, he aimed to stabilize the foundation of his realm. It was a plan that appealed to peasants and small farmers, the real movers and shakers of the agrarian economy. And by ensuring these folks had enough land to work, Taizong was essentially planting seeds, not just of crops, but of loyalty. However, let's not get carried away with the romance of it all. The equal field system wasn't some utopia where everyone lived happily ever after plowing their fields. Implementing it was a colossal headache, akin to herding cats across a minefield. Bureaucrats had to keep meticulous records, and any inaccuracies could lead to disputes that made family feuds look like a picnic. But the potential payoff was enormous: a more equitable society, and an empire less prone to the rebellions that had toppled dynasties past. Then there was the matter of the bureaucracy. If you think office politics are bad today, try navigating the Byzantine corridors of Tang administration. Taizong, ever the innovator, decided it was time to shake things up with the imperial examinations. Picture this: a merit-based system where officials were chosen not because of who they knew, but because of what they knew. Revolutionary, right? It was like a reality show for scholars, but with a far more significant prize than a shiny trophy: an actual governmental position. The exams tested knowledge of Confucian classics, among other things, and were intended to create a class of bureaucrats who were competent and, crucially, loyal to the state rather than their own family interests. This was about as popular as discovering a new flavor of ice cream during a heat wave. The exams were grueling, but they offered a rare opportunity for social mobility. For many, passing these exams was their golden ticket out of obscurity and into the halls of power. Of course, there's always a catch. While the exams were designed to be impartial, the reality was a little different. Wealthy families had access to better education and resources, giving them a leg up. Plus, the exams themselves weren't immune to corruption. A well-placed bribe could work wonders. So, while the meritocracy was a step in the right direction, it wasn't exactly the flawless system of fairness we might imagine. In creating this bureaucratic meritocracy, Taizong was laying the groundwork for a more centralized and efficient state. The imperial examinations would become a cornerstone of Chinese governance for centuries, influencing not just who ran the country, but how it was run. It was a system designed to balance power, reward talent, and hopefully keep the empire from falling into the same traps that had ensnared its predecessors. But let's not put Taizong on too high a pedestal just yet. His reforms were as much about consolidating his power as they were about altruistic governance. By reducing the influence of aristocratic families and elevating men of talent, he was ensuring that his empire was run by people who owed their positions to him. It was a shrewd move, turning potential rivals into loyal subjects. With these reforms, Taizong was crafting an empire that was as stable as it was formidable. But beneath the surface, the challenges of maintaining such a sprawling realm were never far away. Economic stability, social mobility, and centralized power were not just buzzwords. They were the building blocks of an empire that would endure long after Taizong's reign had ended. Yet, as we'll see, even the most well-laid plans can be thrown into disarray by the unpredictable currents of history. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let's just say that Taizong's legacy was as complex as the man himself, a blend of visionary leadership and ruthless pragmatism that would leave an indelible mark on the annals of Chinese history. And speaking of unpredictable currents, Emperor Taizong was about to dive headfirst into the swirling waters of foreign relations. Picture diplomacy not as a game of strategic chess, but more like herding cats, except the cats are riding horses, and some of them are trying to invade your empire. Welcome to Taizong's world of international politics, where the stakes were high, and losing often involved more than just a bruised ego. Taizong's most significant foreign policy challenge came from the Eastern Turks, a formidable force renowned for their cavalry skills and their penchant for causing headaches. These guys were like the varsity team of nomadic warriors, and they had a knack for swooping in and causing chaos. By the time Taizong took the throne in 626 AD, the Eastern Turks were at the height of their power, controlling vast territories north of China. Now, Taizong wasn't about to let a group of horse-riding nomads dictate terms to his burgeoning empire. He needed a plan, and it was going to require more than just brute force. Enter the diplomatic masterstroke. Taizong decided to play the long game by sowing discord among the Eastern Turks, a strategy that was as risky as it was brilliant. He knew that the strength of the Turks lay in their unity, so he did what any shrewd politician would do. He set about breaking it. The key to this strategy was a combination of military pressure and clever alliances. In 630 AD, After years of skirmishes and negotiations, Taizong's forces defeated the Eastern Turkic Khanate in a decisive campaign. This wasn't just a victory on the battlefield. It was a diplomatic masterclass. By supporting rival factions within the Turkic leadership and offering generous terms to those who surrendered, Taizong effectively dismantled the power structure that had kept the Turks united. But Taizong didn't stop there. Ever the opportunist, he invited the defeated Turkic leaders to his court in Chang'an, not just to flaunt his victory, but to subtly showcase the prosperity of his empire. Imagine a state visit crossed with a luxury product launch. By displaying the Tang Dynasty's wealth and culture, he was sending a message. Join us, and you too can have a slice of this pie. It was a diplomatic flex that would make even the suavest modern politician nod in appreciation. The defeat of the Eastern Turks was more than just a military triumph. It was a turning point that solidified the Tang Dynasty's northern borders and projected Chinese power deep into Central Asia. Taizong's court became a melting pot of cultures and ideas, with delegations from as far as Persia and Byzantium coming to pay their respects. It was a bit like the United Nations, but with more silk robes and fewer lengthy speeches. Now, let's not get too misty-eyed about this era of international cooperation. The courtly displays of wealth and sophistication were as much about intimidation as they were about diplomacy. Taizong was making it clear that the Tang Dynasty wasn't just a regional power, it was a global player. And if a little swagger was what it took to keep the neighbors in line, well, Taizong was more than happy to oblige. In the grand scheme of things, Taizong's foreign policy was a blend of pragmatism and ambition, with a dash of theatrical flair. He understood that a stable empire required not just internal reform, but also secure borders and friendly neighbors, or at least neighbors who were too impressed or too intimidated to cause trouble. This was realpolitik at its finest, centuries before the term was even coined. But let's not pretend this was all part of some grand, benevolent vision. The reality was that Taizong's diplomacy was as self-serving as it was effective. By expanding his influence through both war and words, he was ensuring the Tang Dynasty's dominance, while also cementing his own legacy as a ruler who could not only conquer, but also command respect on the global stage. Yet for all his successes, Taizong's foreign policy was not without its challenges and controversies. Managing these complex relationships required constant attention and a willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. It was a high-wire act that demanded both cunning and charisma, qualities that Taizong had in spades. As we delve deeper into Taizong's reign, it becomes clear that his approach to foreign relations was as multifaceted as the man himself. He was a conqueror and a conciliator, a warrior and a diplomat, a ruler whose ambitions were matched only by his ability to realize them. In the chess game of international politics, Taizong was the grandmaster, moving pieces with precision and foresight. And yet, for all his strategic brilliance, Taizong's legacy in foreign relations was not without its shadows. The very tactics that expanded the Tang Dynasty's influence also sowed the seeds of future conflicts. As new powers rose and old alliances shifted, it was a reminder that in the ever-changing landscape of global politics, even the most carefully laid plans can unravel. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's leave Taizong in his court, surrounded by the splendor of his empire and the echoes of his conquests. We'll continue to explore his reign, with its triumphs and trials, its innovations and intrigues, as we delve deeper into the life of a man who reshaped the course of Chinese history. Stay tuned, because just like any good epic, there's always more to the story than meets the eye. Now, while Taizong might have been juggling foreign policy like a masterful circus act, his personal life was no less a three-ring spectacle. Let's dive into the side of Taizong that wasn't all about treaties and territorial expansion. Picture this, an emperor with a penchant for poetry and hunting, a blend that seems as odd as a rock star moonlighting as a librarian. Yet for Taizong, his hobbies were more than mere pastimes. They were windows into his complex psyche. To start with, Taizong's love for poetry was as genuine as his taste for power. The man could wield a pen almost as effectively as a sword. His lyrical prowess wasn't just about crafting pretty verses. It was about distilling the chaos of his reign into the elegance of words. Poetry, for Taizong, was a form of introspection, a chance to ponder the nature of power, the burdens of leadership, and perhaps even the ghosts of his past decisions. He wasn't just riding for the court's amusement, he was riding for his own sanity. In one poem, he mused about the fleeting nature of power and life, a poignant reminder that even those who command empires must reckon with mortality. But let's not wax too lyrical here. Taizong's poetry also served a more pragmatic purpose. It was a political tool, a way to connect with scholars and intellectuals who valued literary finesse as much as military might. In a society where calligraphy and poetry were revered, Taizong's verses helped bolster his image as a cultured and enlightened ruler. He wasn't just the emperor who could conquer lands. He was the emperor who could conquer hearts and minds through his art. Now, juxtapose this with his love for hunting, and you have a man whose interests span the genteel and the primal. Hunting was not just a leisurely pursuit for Taizong. It was a demonstration of prowess, a literal exercise in power dynamics. Picture an imperial hunt, a grand affair with an entourage that would make any modern red carpet event seem quaint. Taizong, astride his horse, bow in hand, was the embodiment of the Tang Dynasty's martial spirit. In these moments, he wasn't just hunting game. He was asserting dominance over nature itself. But here's where the myth-busting comes in. While the romantic image of the emperor-poet-hunter paints Taizong as a Renaissance man before the Renaissance, the reality is a bit more grounded. Hunting was also a way to keep the military sharp and ready for action, a practical measure disguised as leisure. It was about ensuring that his troops, and indeed himself, remained in peak physical condition. So while it might seem like Taizong was indulging in a leisurely pastime, he was also preparing for the very real threats that loomed at his empire's borders. Let's shift gears now and talk about Taizong's relationships with his advisors, especially the legendary Wei Zheng. If there's a historical equivalent of that friend who tells it like it is, Wei Zheng is your guy. Wei Zheng was known for his honesty, a trait that in any other court might have been a fast track to an early grave. But Taizong, ever the shrewd ruler, recognized the value of a man who wasn't afraid to point out when the emperor's proverbial robes were a bit too transparent. Wei Zheng's role in Taizong's court was akin to a modern-day truth-teller, a trusted advisor who provided unvarnished counsel. It was a dynamic that was as risky as it was rewarding. Wei Zheng would openly criticize Taizong's decisions, often to the emperor's face, which, let's be honest, is a level of bravery that deserves its own monument. But here's the kicker. Taizong valued this brutal honesty. He understood that surrounding himself with yes-men was a surefire way to steer the empire into an iceberg of poor decisions. Their relationship was built on a mutual understanding. Taizong knew that Wei Zheng's critiques were not personal attacks, but rather efforts to steer the empire towards a better course. It's said that after Wei Zheng's death, Taizong lamented losing a mirror, an apt metaphor for the advisor who held up a reflection of the emperor's own actions and decisions. This might sound like a heartwarming tale of friendship, but it was also a pragmatic alliance. Taizong needed someone who could provide a reality check, ensuring that his policies were grounded in practicality rather than hubris. Now, let's not get carried away with this bromance. The reality was that Wei Zheng's candid critiques often led to tension. Picture a boardroom where the CEO is constantly challenged by a particularly outspoken consultant. It wasn't always smooth sailing, and there were times when Taizong's patience wore thin. Yet the emperor's ability to tolerate dissent was part of what made his reign effective. It was a calculated risk, allowing space for criticism to refine his rule, even if it occasionally stung his pride. And what about the rest of Taizong's court? While Wei Zheng was the standout star, Taizong surrounded himself with a diverse cast of advisors, each bringing their own expertise to the table. This wasn't just about creating a think tank. It was about crafting a government that could adapt and respond to the myriad challenges of running an empire. It was a bit like assembling an all-star team, each player chosen for their unique skills and perspectives. In summary, if Taizong's court were a reality show, it would be a mix of The West Wing meets Survivor. Advisors needed to be both politically savvy and resilient, able to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics while contributing to the empire's stability and prosperity. This wasn't just a matter of playing the game. It was about playing it well enough to leave a lasting impact. So, as we leave Taizong in the midst of his courtly machinations and personal pursuits, it's clear that his reign was as multifaceted as the man himself. Whether through poetry, hunting, or the counsel of a fearless advisor, Taizong's life was a testament to the blend of strength and subtlety required to rule an empire. But don't turn off the historical channel just yet. There's still more to explore in the final act of Taizong's extraordinary story. As we step into the final act of Emperor Taizong's life, his legacy looms large, casting a shadow that stretches well beyond his reign. Imagine a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, reform, and a touch of ruthlessness. Taizong's rule was a mosaic of visionary leadership and pragmatic decisions, leaving behind an empire that was both a well-oiled machine and a powder keg waiting to spark. So, how did this emperor, once a prince embroiled in deadly family feuds, become a figure immortalized in the annals of history? Let's untangle the threads. First up, governance. Under Taizong, the Tang Dynasty didn't just survive, it thrived. His economic reforms, like the equal field system, were game changers. By distributing land to those who could cultivate it, Taizong ensured that the empire's backbone, its farmers, were empowered and productive. It's not exactly socialism, but it wasn't a feudal free-for-all either. By cutting taxes down to 10% of the harvest, he was essentially giving peasants the medieval equivalent of a tax holiday. And who wouldn't love a government that lets you keep more of your hard-earned grain? But let's not paint Taizong as some altruistic hero of agrarian justice. His policies were as much about maintaining control as they were about fairness. By keeping the populace satisfied and productive, Taizong was creating a stable foundation for his reign. It was a bit like giving your favorite employee a bonus to ensure they don't jump ship to a competitor. Practical, effective, and a touch self-serving. Now, on to culture. Taizong didn't just want to be remembered as a ruler who balanced the books. He wanted to leave a cultural legacy. Cue his patronage of the arts and literature. Under his reign, Chang'an became a bustling epicenter of culture and innovation. The city was a melting pot, where ideas flowed as freely as the Yellow River. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of its time, but with more calligraphy and fewer tech startups. By promoting Confucian ideals and the arts, Taizong wasn't just preserving culture, he was actively shaping it. Yet, let's not forget that culture was also a soft power tool in Taizong's arsenal. By fostering an environment where scholars thrived, he was attracting the brightest minds to his court, ensuring that his empire was a beacon of enlightenment. It was an intellectual flex that showed the world that the Tang Dynasty wasn't just about military might. It was a civilization at the pinnacle of sophistication. Now, onto the myths. The romanticized view of Taizong as a benevolent autocrat. It's as appealing as it is misleading. The truth is, Taizong's reign was a balancing act between compassion and cold calculation. Yes, he was a ruler who listened to his advisors, but he was also the man who orchestrated the Xuanwu Gate incident. It's like watching a historical drama where you're rooting for the anti-hero, knowing full well they have a penchant for ruthlessness. While some accounts paint Taizong as a just and wise ruler, there's no denying his Machiavellian streak. He was a master of realpolitik long before the term became a political buzzword. His strategic marriages, alliances, and even his diplomatic overtures were all aimed at consolidating power. It's a fascinating duality. A ruler who could pen a soul-searching poem one moment and order a military campaign the next. For all his achievements, Taizong's legacy is a study in contrasts. He was both a unifier and a divider, unifying China while dividing his enemies with calculated precision. His reign is often hailed as a golden age, but let's not kid ourselves into thinking it was all peace and prosperity. Beneath the surface, tensions simmered, and the very reforms that stabilized the empire also laid the groundwork for future upheavals. In the end, Taizong's impact on China was profound. He set the stage for a dynasty that would last nearly 3 centuries, influencing governance, culture, and even foreign policy for generations to come. His reign was a masterclass in leadership, blending vision with pragmatism, charisma with cunning. He was a ruler who understood that to build an empire, you needed more than just might. You needed the wisdom to wield it judiciously. So, what's the takeaway from Taizong's storied life? Perhaps it's the reminder that history is never black and white. It's a tapestry of shades, where legends are born not from perfection, but from the complex interplay of virtues and vices. Taizong's life was a testament to this complexity, a saga of ambition, power, and the relentless pursuit of legacy. As the curtain falls on his chapter, we're left with a portrait of a ruler who reshaped China, for better or worse, leaving an indelible mark on the fabric of history. And isn't that the true measure of a legacy? The ancient Mayans, a civilization that conjures images of towering pyramids, elaborate calendars, and for some reason, a lot of people think they were all about human sacrifice. Thanks, Hollywood. So, let's peel back the layers of this complex society that thrived in Mesoamerica long before Europeans knew New World tacos were a thing. The Mayans were kicking it in what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador, roughly from 2000 BC to the 16th century AD. Yeah, they were around for quite a stretch, making them the original long-term planners. Let's talk geography. The Mayan civilization wasn't just sitting pretty in one spot. They spread out across a diverse landscape that included volcanic highlands, dense jungles, and the oh-so-cozy Yucatan Peninsula. These folks weren't just lounging around waiting for the next monsoon. No, they were building some pretty impressive stuff. When it comes to architecture, the Mayans were like the Steve Jobs of their time, innovative, a little mysterious, and leaving everyone wondering how they did it. They constructed sprawling cities like Tikal, Capan, and Palenque, each with its own personality and pizzazz. Now, let's debunk the romanticized notion of these cities being lost in the jungle. Sure, some were overgrown by tropical foliage over the centuries, but that doesn't mean people just forgot about them like an old sock behind the couch. The Mayan cities were bustling hubs, connected by trade routes that spread their influence far beyond the jungle. Think of them as the ancient version of your favorite hipster neighborhood, vibrant, full of culture, and everyone's a little too into artisanal corn. City planning for the Mayans was all about that aesthetic balance. Function met form with the precision of a Swiss watch. Their cities were meticulously laid out, with ceremonial centers, palaces, ball courts, and of course, those iconic step pyramids that look like something out of an ancient architect's fever dream. They didn't just plop a pyramid down and call it a day. These structures were aligned with celestial bodies. It's like having your house face the perfect sunset every day, but with way more mathematical precision. To get a sense of their architectural prowess, picture this. The pyramid at El Mirador, known as La Danta, stands at a staggering 230 feet tall. That's taller than the Great Pyramid of Giza, by the way. Who needs cranes or steel supports when you've got a civilization adept at using limestone and manpower to defy gravity and logic? And speaking of manpower, the Mayans didn't have beasts of burden or the wheel for construction. Just let that sink in. Everything was done with human muscle and ingenuity. Talk about a workout plan. The Mayan cities were not isolated fortresses. They were bustling centers of trade and interaction. Goods like jade, obsidian, cacao, and textiles moved along well-established trade routes. The Mayans were economic powerhouses long before anyone thought to put economist on a business card. They had trade networks that stretched across Mesoamerica, influencing and being influenced by their neighbors. In essence, they were the original globalists, if your definition of global includes a lot of jungle and no internet. Now, about those lost cities. The term conjures images of intrepid explorers hacking through the jungle with machetes, Indiana Jones style. But let's be real, Mayan cities weren't lost to the people who lived there and around there. They knew exactly where they were, even if the rest of the world took a few centuries to catch up. The Mayans themselves may have abandoned some cities due to environmental changes, economic shifts, or political instability, problems as old as civilization itself. It's like when your favorite coffee shop abruptly closes, and you're left wondering where to get your caffeine fix. So, why does all this matter? Well, the Mayan civilization challenges our notions of what an ancient society could achieve, especially when you consider they didn't have the wheel or metal tools. They were masters of sustainability, adapting to their environment with a level of sophistication that would make any modern urban planner green with envy. The Mayans were not just players in a tropical game of Sim City. They were innovators, thinkers, and strategists of the highest order. As we dive deeper into their story, let's keep in mind that the Mayans were more than just the sum of their architectural achievements. They were a complex society with rich traditions, scientific advancements, and a cultural legacy that continues to captivate us today. So, grab your metaphorical machete. There's a lot more jungle to explore in the world of the Mayans, and it's anything but lost. So, as we wade deeper into this jungle of Mayan brilliance, let's talk about the ancient equivalent of a smartphone app we all pretend to understand, but can't live without: the Mayan calendar. This wasn't your typical flip-through-the-pages kind of deal. Nope, the Mayans took timekeeping to a whole new level, crafting a calendar system that would make even the most meticulous watchmaker break into a sweat. The Mayan calendar is like the Swiss Army knife of calendars, multifunctional, precise, and capable of inspiring both awe and confusion in equal measure. First off, let's clear up the elephant in the room, the whole 2012 apocalypse thing. Remember when everyone was convinced the world was going to end because a calendar said so? Spoiler alert, it didn't. The Mayans didn't predict doomsday. They simply reached the end of a cycle in their long count calendar, which is about as catastrophic as your phone hitting 0% battery. Annoying, sure, but not the end of civilization. If anything, 2012 was just the Mayan equivalent of hitting the refresh button on your digital life. Their long count calendar, which spans roughly 125 years, was like their version of a cosmic odometer rolling over. It marked the end of a Bacton, a time period of about 394 years, not the end of the world. Their calendar system was the envy of ancient civilizations, boasting not just one, but 3 different calendars that interlocked like a set of cosmic gears. They had the Taizong, a 260-day ceremonial calendar, the Harb, a 365-day solar calendar, and the long count, which we've already mentioned. Together, they created a system of timekeeping that was as intricate as it was accurate. It's like if the Gregorian calendar was mashed together with a lunar calendar and a countdown clock, just to keep things interesting. But this wasn't just about marking time or scheduling festivals. The Mayans used their astronomical prowess to aid in agriculture and governance. Their understanding of celestial movements helped them predict the rainy seasons, which was crucial for their agrarian economy. They didn't just plant crops willy-nilly. They timed their planting and harvesting to align with the stars, ensuring that they got the most bang for their agricultural buck. It's like checking the farmer's almanac, but with more star power and less guesswork. The Mayan elite, the scribes and priests, were the keepers of this celestial wisdom. They were the ones who mastered the art of writing, recording history and prophecy in their codices, essentially ancient Mesoamerican books. These codices were no casual scribbles on a napkin. They were meticulously crafted works of art, made from the inner bark of fig trees. Creating just one codex was a labor-intensive process, akin to publishing a limited edition hardcover today, complete with gilded pages and a hefty price tag. The economic implications of this scribble class were significant. These educated elites were akin to the content creators of their time, producing work that was crucial for the functioning of Mayan society. But unlike today's YouTube influencers, they weren't rolling in sponsorship deals or posting #ad on Instagram. The labor costs involved in producing a single codex were substantial, requiring skilled artisans who were the rock stars of their age. Think of them as the original information brokers, with knowledge that was both a commodity and a currency in its own right. The Mayan writing system itself was a marvel, with over 800 glyphs used to convey everything from royal proclamations to astronomical calculations. This wasn't some simplistic picture book. It was a complex script that allowed for nuanced expression. In a world where literacy was a rare skill, Mayan scribes held a unique position of power. They were the gatekeepers of knowledge, the ones who could read the stars, and then write down their secrets for posterity. In a society where what you knew often determined your place in the world, these scribes were VIPs in the Mayan social hierarchy. Yet, let's not romanticize this too much. The scribble class might have been privileged, but their role also came with its pressures. The demand for knowledge was incessant, and the accuracy of their records could make or break the fortunes of a city-state. Imagine having the fate of a civilization resting on your ability to get the math right. No pressure, right. They were the unsung heroes, or perhaps the stressed-out accountants of their time, ensuring that the Mayan world kept spinning on its celestial axis. In this way, the Mayan calendar and writing system were not just tools of timekeeping and communication, but were integral to the very fabric of their society. They were the means by which the Mayans connected with the divine, structured their everyday lives, and recorded their history for future generations. Their calendars didn't just mark days. They were woven into the rhythm of life, dictating when to plant, when to harvest, and when to hold elaborate rituals to appease gods or celebrate celestial events. The Mayans didn't just live in harmony with the cosmos. They danced to its tune, crafting a civilization that was as much about looking to the stars as it was about grounding themselves in the earth. Their understanding of time and space was a testament to their intellectual curiosity and their desire to make sense of the universe around them. So next time you glance up at the stars, remember the Mayans, the original stargazers who didn't just map the heavens, they wrote the manual for living by them. And speaking of writing manuals for living, let's dive into the Mayan brainpower, starting with their use of zero, a concept so revolutionary. It's like discovering the mute button on a conference call. The Mayans were among the first in the world to use zero as a placeholder and a numeral, way back in the 4th century AD. That's right, long before Europeans were still counting on their fingers and calling it a day. The Mayans were busy laying the mathematical groundwork that would eventually support their astronomical achievements and architectural wonders. Imagine trying to build a civilization without zero. It's like trying to bake a cake without flour. Sure, you can throw a lot of sugar at the problem, but it's just not going to rise. Zero wasn't just a number to the Mayans. It was a symbol of potential, a mathematical chameleon that could transform calculations, predict celestial events, and keep those impressive calendars ticking. In their Vigesimal base 20 system, zero allowed the Mayans to express large numbers succinctly, which was crucial when you're trying to figure out when the next solar eclipse is due or how many steps you need on that pyramid to make it line up with Venus. Their mathematical prowess was the secret source behind their ability to not only track celestial movements with stunning accuracy, but also to align their cities and monuments with the cosmos. Now, let's talk astronomy. The Mayans didn't just dabble in it. They dominated the field like it was an intergalactic chess match. They observed the sky with such precision that their predictions of solar and lunar eclipses were often accurate within a day. They recognized the cycles of Venus and even tracked the movements of Jupiter and Mars. This wasn't just stargazing for the sake of pretty lights. It was a strategic enterprise that informed everything from agriculture to warfare. Knowing the exact position of Venus could determine the timing of a war campaign. Imagine generals today consulting horoscopes before deploying troops. But why all the fuss about stars and planets? Well, the Mayans believed that the heavens were a reflection of earthly affairs. The movements of celestial bodies were seen as divine signals, a cosmic email from the gods that needed careful reading. Their observatories were the ancient equivalent of mission control, but instead of launching rockets, they were launching rituals and ceremonies. The observatories, like the one at Chichen Itza, were architectural masterpieces in themselves. The caracal, or snail, is a round building that spirals into the sky, perfectly crafted to track Venus. It's like Stonehenge got a modern upgrade with a Mayan twist. The Mayans' deep connection with the cosmos was woven into the fabric of their society. Their cities were laid out to mirror celestial patterns, their rituals timed to the rhythms of the universe. This wasn't just a hobby for the geeky elite. It was a vital part of Mayan identity and spirituality. And while we might chuckle at the idea of people basing their crops on star patterns, let's not forget that our modern-day farmers still consult the Farmer's Almanac, a relic of the past that echoes the Mayans' cosmic calendar. Let's not sugarcoat this with romantic notions, though. The Mayans weren't just wide-eyed dreamers gazing at the stars and contemplating life's mysteries. They were practical thinkers who understood that the universe was a vast clockwork mechanism that could be studied, predicted, and harnessed for their benefit. Astronomy wasn't just about looking up. It was about understanding patterns and cycles that could influence everything from weather forecasting to political power plays. In a world without GPS, the Mayans used the stars to navigate not just the physical landscape, but the intricate social and political realms of their time. Economically, this celestial knowledge translated into power and influence. The Mayans' ability to predict celestial events meant they could orchestrate elaborate ceremonies and festivals, drawing people from far and wide. These events weren't just spiritual gatherings. They were economic boons that boosted trade and reinforced alliances. In this sense, the Mayans were the original event planners, leveraging their astronomical insights to secure their place in the Mesoamerican world. Yet, despite their achievements, the Mayans are often painted with the broad brush of the noble savage stereotype, a term as outdated as a rotary phone. This myth suggests that ancient peoples were simple, unchanging, and somehow more in tune with nature, ignoring the complexity and sophistication of their societies. The reality is far more fascinating. The Mayans were innovators, thinkers, and strategists who used their knowledge of mathematics and astronomy to navigate the challenges of their time, just as we do today with our smartphones and satellites. So, as we continue to explore the legacy of the Mayans, let's remember that they were more than just pyramid builders and stargazers. They were a civilization that understood the power of numbers and the mysteries of the universe, using both to create a society that was as complex and vibrant as the jungle that surrounded them. Their story isn't just a chapter in the ancient history book. It's a testament to human ingenuity and the timeless quest to understand our place in the cosmos. And with that, let's keep our eyes on the stars and our feet firmly on the jungle floor as we delve further into the remarkable world of the Mayans. So, as we tighten our sandals and prepare to trek through Mayan agriculture and trade, let's leave those lofty cosmic heights and dig our toes into the rich soil of their everyday ingenuity. The Mayans, masters of adaptation, transformed their environment into a veritable Garden of Eden, though perhaps with fewer apples and more maize. Their agricultural prowess was the bedrock of their society, supporting bustling city-states and elaborate political machinations. First on the menu, slash-and-burn farming. No, this isn't the Mayan version of a rock band. It was a method of clearing land by cutting down vegetation and burning it to enrich the soil with nutrients. Think of it as hitting the reset button on nature, but with a bit more smoke and a lot more fire. This technique might sound a tad destructive, but in a world without synthetic fertilizers, was a savvy way to rejuvenate the land. The Mayans were essentially practicing sustainable farming long before it became a trendy hashtag. Each plot could be farmed intensively for a few years before moving on, allowing the forest to reclaim the land and the soil to recover, a sort of agricultural rotation that kept their society fed and flourishing. But nature is a fickle partner, and when the jungle wasn't playing nice, the Mayans rolled up their sleeves and got creative. Enter terrace farming, the ancient precursor to your favorite rooftop garden. In the mountainous regions, the Mayans carved steps into the hillsides, creating flat surfaces for planting. This not only increased arable land, but also helped manage water flow and reduce erosion. It's like Mother Nature handed them lemons, and they grew a lush citrus grove on a hill. The Mayans' agricultural toolkit didn't stop there. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems to navigate the dry spells, channeling precious water to their crops with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Chultuns, or underground cisterns, were used to collect and store rainwater, ensuring that even during the driest months, their fields remained green and their granaries full. This wasn't just clever engineering. It was a lifeline in a world where food security was as elusive as a cat on a hot tin roof. Now, let's shift gears and hit the road, because the Mayans were no homebodies. Their trade routes stretched far and wide, covering distances that would impress even the most seasoned business traveler. These roads weren't just dirt paths. They were the arteries of a vibrant economic network that connected city-states and cultures across Mesoamerica. Picture jade, obsidian, cacao, and textiles flowing like a river of wealth, linking the Mayans with their neighbors in a complex web of commerce. Trade wasn't just about goods. It was a diplomatic dance that required skill, tact, and a keen understanding of value. Forget about swiping credit cards or scanning QR codes. The Mayans operated on a barter system that would make your head spin. Imagine negotiating for a bolt of cloth with cacao beans or trading obsidian blades for precious jade. It was a world where the value of a commodity was as much about perception as it was about utility, and the art of the deal was an essential skill. This barter economy, while seemingly primitive, was a sophisticated system that required a deep understanding of supply and demand. The Mayans were adept at identifying what commodities were valued where, and they exploited these differences with the shrewdness of Wall Street traders, minus the suits and skyscrapers. Their trade networks weren't just about moving goods. They were about moving ideas, technology, and culture, creating a dynamic exchange that fueled their civilization's growth. And let's not forget the social and political structures that these economic activities supported. The trade routes were more than highways for goods. They were the lifelines of power and influence. City-states vied for control of key trade hubs, and alliances were forged and broken over access to lucrative markets. The Mayans understood that economic clout was just as important as military might, and they wielded it with the finesse of a master chess player. But let's not romanticize this too much. The Mayans' economic prowess wasn't all sunshine and lollipops. The competition for resources and trade dominance could be as cutthroat as a corporate takeover. City-states engaged in economic brinkmanship, leveraging trade embargoes and alliances to tip the scales in their favor. It's like Game of Thrones, but with more feathers and fewer dragons. Economically speaking, the Mayans were light years ahead of their time, even if they were bartering cacao beans instead of trading bitcoins. Their economy was as complex as it was resilient, capable of weathering the storms of political upheaval and environmental change. Yet, despite their achievements, the Mayans remained shrouded in myths and misconceptions, often reduced to caricatures of primitive simplicity or mystical wisdom. But the reality is far more compelling. The Mayans were pragmatic and innovative, crafting a society that was as sophisticated as it was resilient. They understood that the strength of their civilization lay not just in their ability to build grand pyramids or chart the stars, but in their capacity to feed their people, trade with their neighbors, adapt to a constantly changing world. So, as we continue our journey through the world of the Mayans, let's keep in mind that their story is one of innovation, adaptation, and survival. They were a people who understood the intricacies of the land and the complexities of human interaction, using both to create a civilization that was as enduring as it was enigmatic. With that, let's keep our eyes peeled and our minds open, as the tale of the Mayans is far from over. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of their remarkable legacy, and there's plenty more jungle to explore. So, as we continue our expedition through the dense thicket of Mayan history, it's time to confront the proverbial elephant in the jungle. What happened to the Mayans? Cue the dramatic music and the whispers of mysterious disappearance, because nothing piques human curiosity quite like a good vanishing act. But before we get lost in a maze of conspiracy theories and ancient alien hypotheses, let's ground ourselves in reality. The truth is, the Mayan civilization didn't vanish into thin air. It experienced a gradual decline, like a slowly deflating balloon, rather than an explosive disappearance. First, let's tackle the myth of the Mayans packing up and leaving overnight. Contrary to popular belief, the abandonment of the great cities like Tikal and Kapan wasn't some hasty exodus. It happened over centuries, and there was no single, catastrophic event that sealed their fate. Instead, a cocktail of factors contributed to what historians call the classic Maya collapse, which unfolded around the 9th century AD. Imagine a perfect storm of climate change, warfare, and political upheaval, and you're on the right track. Climate change wasn't invented by our modern age of carbon footprints and melting ice caps. The Mayans faced their own environmental challenges, including prolonged periods of drought. These weren't just your typical dry spells. They were what scientists call megadroughts, lasting decades and wreaking havoc on agriculture. For a society that relied heavily on crop yields, these droughts were like pulling the plug on their life support system. With the rains playing hard to get, food became scarcer, leading to famines and social unrest. It's like a game of Jenga, where one wrong move, or in this case, one missing rainy season, causes the whole tower to wobble. Next, let's add a dash of warfare to the mix. The Mayans were not just peaceful astronomers in feathered headdresses. They were also fierce warriors who engaged in conflicts that make modern office politics look like a playground spat. As resources dwindled, competition for what remained intensified. City-states turned on each other like siblings fighting over the last cookie, leading to increased militarization and a breakdown of alliances. The political landscape became a chessboard of shifting allegiances and power plays, where betrayal was as common as a rainy day in the jungle, when the rains actually came, that is. The societal shifts were equally seismic. The traditional power structures struggled to adapt to the changing times. The ruling elites, once seen as the divinely ordained mediators between the gods and the people, found their credibility dwindling as they failed to appease angry deities and desperate citizens. When your divine credentials are tied to weather predictions and crop success, a drought can be more than just a dry spell. It's a PR disaster. The social contract between the rulers and the ruled began to fray as people lost faith in the promises of their leaders. While these factors may paint a grim picture, they also underscore a key point. The Mayans didn't just disappear, they evolved. Many communities adapted by migrating to areas less affected by drought or conflict. Others integrated with emerging cultures, blending traditions to create new societal tapestries. Think of it as a cultural remix, where the beats of the past intertwined with the rhythms of the present. The descendants of the Mayans still live in the region today, preserving aspects of their heritage while navigating the modern world. Now, as we look at the legacy of the Mayans, it's clear that their impact extends far beyond crumbling ruins and unreadable glyphs. Their understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering has left an indelible mark on the world. Their innovations were not just products of their time. They were seeds planted for future generations to cultivate. The Mayan calendar, for instance, still fascinates us with its complexity and precision, a testament to their sophisticated grasp of time. In modern Mesoamerican communities, elements of Mayan culture remain vibrant. Language, art, and religious practices continue to thrive, a living link to a storied past. These communities are not relics of a bygone era, but dynamic societies that embody resilience and adaptation, the very traits that define their ancestors. Globally, the Mayan influence pops up in the most unexpected places. From the architectural inspiration behind modern buildings to the narrative arcs of Hollywood blockbusters, their legacy is woven into the fabric of our collective imagination. And let's not forget the culinary contributions. Chocolate and avocados, anyone. The Mayans were the original foodies who knew how to turn cacao beans into a delectable treat, paving the way for our modern-day chocolate obsession. So, as we wrap up our journey through the world of the Mayans, let's leave behind the myths of sudden disappearances and mystical prophecies. Instead, let's recognize the Mayans for what they truly were. A civilization of thinkers and innovators who faced immense challenges with ingenuity and determination. Their story is not one of disappearance, but of transformation, a reminder that history is not a static tale, but an ever-evolving narrative. And as we ponder the lessons of the Mayans, let's keep in mind one final quip about history's tendency to repeat itself. In our own time, we face challenges that echo those of the ancient Mayans: climate change, political strife, social upheaval. Perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from them is the importance of adaptability and resilience. After all, history may have a habit of repeating itself, but it also teaches us that the future is ours to shape. So, let's take a page from the Mayan Book of Life and dance to the cosmic rhythm with a little more grace and a lot more wisdom.